This one candidate could not learn the new drill movement. I called him an idiot. He had the audacity to say, "This candidate is not an idiot." And he's looking at me as he says it. I sprinted into the duty hut, came back out with a Webster's dictionary, and I found idiot. And I go, "Read it," in front of the whole platoon. He says, "A person mentally inferior or capable to learn something new." I had him by the balls. I grabbed the book, I slam it, and I go, "I rest my case." Japan was hit with these earthquakes. We divert to Japan to help with recovery. And I'll tell you, I have never been more emotional than what I saw that day. When you looked into the sea, the top was filled with families dead, holding hands, still missing legs, bodies. You see a face looking up at you, floating in the water. Teddy bear with a girl. We get to the Yellow Bridge that crosses into Baghdad. And then we start receiving artillery fire. But one of the artillery rounds lands in our vehicle. Tremendous explosion. I get blown back against the wall, and then I start hearing screaming. So I run over to the AV to grab a torso of a body and then pick up a decapitated head with the eyes looking at me to match it to the body to put in a body bag. My name is Jean-Paul Courville. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1991 to 2013. I retired as a sergeant major. So I grew up in Southeast Louisiana. I was born in 1972. So growing up in the 70s and the 80s was a very wonderful time. We didn't realize it until we looked back and how great that was at that time frame. But I came from a very loving family, a very religious family. My mother and father were together until both of them passed away, and I was loved and cared for. But in my upbringing, I was overweight from the age of 10 to 13. And part of that is because the food is so wonderful in Southeast Louisiana. So my father was from the Atchafalaya Basin, which is the Cajun country around Lafayette, Opelousas, Louisiana. My mother was born in New Orleans. They met in the Atchafalaya Basin area in a small little town called Port Barre. So we knew we were going to have good food in the house. And so my mother always was cooking, always had food available. So it was a great upbringing, but I was overweight and I was also shy. So around the age of 13, I was the last guy picked on every PE class. So imagine that. Volleyball, football, basketball, baseball. Whenever you pick teams, I am that cliche person that was picked last all the time. So that was my upbringing. But my mother loved me so much that she just could give me comfort. She would tell me that I was doing great, to keep going after it, and then feed me. You know what I mean? So in 1985, my father took me to see 2 movies that year. And one was Rocky IV and the other one was Rambo First Blood Part 2. And I was completely changed watching that in the theater. I was only 13 years of age. I have never seen an audience in a movie theater react the way they did when they were watching the final fight in Rocky IV. And then seeing all of these characters on screen that were well built and they were very confident. I remember asking my father, "Dad, can I get a gym membership so I could get myself in shape?" And my dad said, "There is no way I'm going to spend money on a gym membership because you change your opinion and your desires of what you want to do every 2 weeks. But if you work out in this shed out back and you show me that you're dedicated, I'll think about it." So we had this old A-frame shed that sat on the ground. There was no flooring. So whatever the grass or the mud at the time, if it rained, was the flooring. And it was an A-frame. He had a bunch of weights put inside there. There were some metal weights. Some of them were the old concrete-filled weights. We hung a punching bag. We put bars up at the top of the rafters to be a pull-up bar and to do sit-ups on it. We had an old cassette tape in the back corner. We had an old car light that you would hang inside of a hood to do the engine work, hanging inside. And when it rained, in Louisiana quite often, the water would get up to mid-calf inside that gym. So I went into that gym, the shed is what I called it, for 3 months during the summer break between 8th grade and 9th grade. I lost 30 pounds, cut my hair short, and got a tan. When I went to school, no one recognized me. And that was the first transformation I've ever had in my life. And then people are starting to give me credit. "Man, you look amazing. I didn't know who this was." My father was proud of me, but I went 18 months in that shed before I got a gym membership. And to be honest with you, looking back, there was something about working out in that shed that gave me a harder edge, but I was still fighting shyness. So in ninth grade, I decided to try out for football. And we go to do what they call in the field house, these tests of bench presses, squats, and a clean and press. And they would annotate what you did, and then based on your strength, they would put you into position groups they wanted you to put for playing football. Well, I get on the bench press, and I had told some people earlier that day when they were complimenting me on my change that I had done 205 pounds in my shed, and they didn't believe it. There's no way you lifted 205 pounds. So my brain is starting to wonder, did I actually do 205 pounds? Because some of the weights, even though it said 25 pounds, are the old weights that had the concrete fill it. So I get on the bench, they put 185, I knock it out. They put it up to 205, I bench press it. I'm the talk of the town. Everyone cannot believe it. No one was even close to me in ninth grade, right? But what goes up must come down. So the next day, everyone's talking. Are you the guy that bench pressed 205 pounds at 13 years of age? Yes, that's me. Well, now everyone wants to see what I can do for a squat. Now, I hadn't done any squats before. All I had done was leg extensions in the shed. So they put me on the rack, and I assume if I bench press 205 pounds, I can squat 205 pounds. So we put 205 on the bar, and everyone in the field house is around me to watch me do this. I get it off the rack, I go down, and I collapse. Bam! Drop down. They start taking the weights off. And now we're down to like 135, and my legs are shaking. And instead of applause and excitement, I hear laughter. And then my shyness just overcame me, and I was destroyed. So I went home. Didn't want to try out again. My father talked to me. He said, you need to go back out there and try again. So I wasn't a very gifted athlete because I didn't know how to use my physicality, and I was so shy. But that lesson stuck with me for life, because what I did is I said I would never let something like that define me. So now, as I'm starting to work on my confidence, I knew that I was not going to go to college or university following high school because I was not very gifted in the classroom. We say ADHD. I was a wanderer. I was always looking outside, always wanting to play. I was the guy on my bike that would ride into the night when the lights went off and my father would whistle late at night and I'd have to come home. That was my life. I wanted to do that. And I started really getting into bodybuilding. Instead of doing team sports, I was kind of going to more of the individual type of sports that were vanity projects. So here I am at 13, overweight, shy. I make a transformation. And now I'm getting accolades for being an individual, and I'm trying to like break the chains and get out of the shyness. So I knew I was going to join the military, but it came down to the Army and the Marine Corps. Now I was leaning towards the Marine Corps, no doubt about it. The uniforms, everything like that, the discipline. But what really got to me, and this is the late 80s to 1990. The Marine Corps was great at telling you that we offer you a challenge to earn the title of Marine. If you join the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, you join that organization. But when you join us, you have to go through a challenge of 12 weeks in basic training, and then you earn something. You're not just called a Marine because you enlist. You have to earn it. And that got to me, right? So the Army recruiter, I give him credit. He was relentless. He did not want me joining the Marine Corps. So he came up to me and said, I want to come to your house and talk to your father. You and your father, I want to sit you down and talk to you. And of course, I'm at that age where I'm going, I want to be airborne ranger. I want to be special forces. And he said, I'm going to talk to you and your father. So he comes to our house. Can't make this up. Sits down with my father and I. Now, let me tell you this. He showed up in a uniform, which the Army actually has, which is a short sleeve shirt and a tie. Never trust a man in a short sleeve shirt and a tie. I worked at Winn-Dixie for a while in high school. It's a grocery store, if you don't know, in the South, right? So you have a Piggly Wiggly. That's kind of where you would shop every day of the week. Winn-Dixie's where you go if you want to get something really nice for Valentine's Day. So I had to wear a short sleeve shirt and a tie, and every one of my assistant managers had short sleeve shirts and a tie, and they always seemed creepy to me. When I would go to church and a deacon would take around an offering plate, anytime I saw someone with a short sleeve shirt and a tie, I didn't trust them. So here comes the Army recruiter to our house wearing a short sleeve shirt and a tie, which the Marine Corps doesn't have. So I already knew I was still leaning towards the Marine Corps. But this is what the Army recruiter did. He sits down, takes a piece of paper, and he writes 25 circles and says, these are chairs in a classroom for Airborne Ranger. That's what he told me. And he writes Courville in the last chair. And he tells my father, if your son signs today, I guarantee him a seat in that back corner for Airborne Ranger. Now, to my father's credit, my father kept saying, my son wants to be a Marine. I can tell. That's all he's talking about. But I'll listen to you. So I went back and forth. And this is what he said that made me enlist in the Marine Corps that day and change. So thank you to the Army for this. He said, Mr. Courville, I'll be honest with you. Down in Panama, when we do jungle warfare and we do force on force, Army against Marine Corps, they kick our ass every time. But that's not the most important thing. The important thing is your son's education, and we have the benefits. Done, enlisted in the Marine Corps that day. That's it.
I don't understand how we thought that was going to make us.
You know, you can't make it up. If I'm lying, I'm dying, right? I had a very good experience with my recruiter, the Marine recruiter. He knew I wanted to be a Marine. So it was a very easy process. You know, he helped me out. He kind of mentored me early on. Yeah, it was that simple. I mean, it was really nothing elaborate. I will say this. Let me back up. At that time, when I joined the Marine Corps and dealing with my recruiter, it was very common that once you went to boot camp, your recruiter forgot you. Now, later on in my military career, that changed where recruiters were still maintaining contact with their poolees and their recruits that were in boot camp, and they stayed in touch with them until they graduated. But when I went in, once you went to boot camp and you shipped, they didn't follow you. But when I graduated, I came home, he was very proud of me. And he complimented me. He gave me a nice certificate. And the funny thing is about 8 years later, I came back to Louisiana after I'd been in the Marine Corps a while, and a bunch of my buddies wanted to take me to a strip club. And we went to a strip club in New Orleans, and there was my recruiter sitting by himself at a chair with a Marine Corps t-shirt on, blue jeans, and running shoes. Can't make it up. And I'm not going to say his name now, but I yelled his name in the strip club, and he turned and looked at me with a beer in his hand, and he's like, do I know you? I was like, you know me. And I told him my name, and then I could tell he was somewhat embarrassed, but at the same time, he was very proud of me because he knew I'd been in the Marine Corps a while. So we had a nice conversation and caught up. So I knew I wanted to be infantry. There was no doubt about it. And of course, when you take the ASVAB, there's all these people that are talking to you about what is going to be the important thing that you can use to transition into a job when you EAS, you end your contract. I surely didn't know I was going to make a career out of the Marine Corps. It was in the back of my head. I did think that. What if I stay in and I have a career? Because I would talk to my father about these things. But I thought, what if I get out of the Marine Corps? What job translates? And that's what everyone was talking to me about. My family, my friends, unsolicited advice. And I was young, so you try to absorb that. But I was at an age where I knew what I wanted. And I wanted to be infantry. There's no doubt about it. And regardless if I qualified for anything else, which I didn't qualify for much at the time, I wanted to be infantry. It was important to me. Now, you could only pick 0300 open. So I wanted to be a machine gunner. That was really what I wanted. But you couldn't pick that. It was just 0300. Once we went to boot camp, and then after we graduated boot camp, we went to MCT, was brand new at the time. So I think MCT originated around 1989. So when I went through in 1991, if you were infantry, you had to go to Marine combat training and then the School of Infantry. And the funny thing about that is the same curriculum that we went through the first 30 days of MCT was the same curriculum that we repeated in the School of Infantry. And we had guys fail the tests in the School of Infantry that they just took 30 days earlier when they were going through Marine combat training. That was always funny to me how that worked, you know. But I remember when I got the news, they were like, okay, those of you that are going to be 0311s, here's your name. Then 0331, machine gunner, 41, mortarman. And when they said Courville, you are an 0331 machine gunner, I was over the moon. That's exactly what I wanted. And this was the M60 Echo 3 machine gun at the time. Boot camp, I went to MCRD San Diego, right, in 1991. And because I've been a drill instructor on multiple tours in my career, I've got a lot of stories about basic training, my own as boot camp and as a drill instructor. And we've heard all the stories a million times. So I will tell you there's one story that really stands out to me. It's not one that you would really think about. Back then, we didn't have special denomination areas at free time before the lights went out to do prayer. So when I was a drill instructor later on, you would have free time, right? And you would tell all the Catholics to gather in one side of the squad bay, all the Protestants to gather on another side of the squad bay, etc. But when I went to boot camp, we all were put into our racks at the position of attention. And the drill instructor would say, Catholic lay leader. And then the Catholic lay leader would say, let us pray. And in our racks, we would all slam our hands together, the whole platoon. Whether you were atheist, Catholic, Baptist, Pentecostal, you name it. You listen to the prayer. Then amen, snap, hands down. Then the Protestant lay leader, our lay leader. Well, one night, the Protestant lay leader said, and I quote, "Dear Lord, let the drill instructors know that these recruits are trying really hard and that we want to come together as a team. But if they could back off so we could understand things better," before he could finish that sentence, drill instructor Staff Sergeant Barrington zeroed out the platoon. If you don't know what zero out the platoon means, they go zero, and the whole platoon says, freeze, recruit, freeze. So he zeroed us out, yelling and screaming, hands back down, and he's like, you're out of your fucking mind. I will pray. Let us pray. We do this like 15 times, right, until we get it right. And then he says, dear Lord, give me the motherfucking power to bend and thrash these weak little bitches until their hearts explode. Amen. And coming from where I come from in Louisiana at the time, this was like blasphemy. But at the same time, I could not stop laughing. It was one of the funniest things I'd ever experienced in my life. Now, I've maintained friendships with many people I went to boot camp with. Not a lot, but there's a few that I've stayed in touch with. And every time we talk, or when there's a group chat put together, we always talk about that story. Isn't that great? You know, in the Marine Corps, we commonly talk about military bearing, being stoic, right? So when I joined boot camp, I was pretty good at military bearing when it came to not showing my emotions, right? Or if I was angry, maybe. I was pretty good at that. And later in my career, I learned to get better at it to where, here's what I would tell you for military bearing and stoicism. I knew that if I had something going on in my personal life, and I'm still good about this today, something negative, something adverse, I wouldn't bring it to work. I wouldn't bring it to another Marine. So if I had a problem at home, I would never take that energy out on a Marine that worked for me or worked with me or alongside of me. I was very good about that with military bearing. With my emotions, with my anger, I got better over time. But the one thing I have never been able to grasp, and this started in boot camp, even till now, is a sense of humor, anything comical. So if a drill instructor did something comical, as serious as I tried to be to hold my military bearing, I was not very good at that. Fast forward to the age I'm at now, in my mid-50s, I'm even just the same. So here's an example. I remember being in boot camp, and the first time they brought us to clothing to get fitted for our service uniform, right? So it's the green jacket. They put it on you a little larger than it should be, and then they go around and they see if they should put another size, and then they tailor it down for you. And you're losing weight and all that type of stuff. I'm standing in the position of attention, all stoic. I'm a squad leader, and there's an overweight diet recruit next to me, and he's wearing his service jacket. Drill instructor Sergeant Sims comes up to him, and I had never heard some of the comedy that drill instructors come up with. They just on the fly, quick, just brilliant. The drill instructor goes, damn boy, you look like a sea bag with lips. And when he said that, I could not hold my bearing. Busting out laughing. Oh, Courville wants to laugh. So then I got punished in my service jacket that they're tailoring. I was push-ups, running and jumping, and I got thrashed, sweating to death. You think I would have gotten better, but I always say that if you lose your sense of humor, you lose everything, right? So even in the worst of times, even in combat, I maintained a sense of humor. Now, not everyone saw that because I always was very aware of people seeing and watching me. But just recently, a year ago, right? So you fast forward from that story I just tell you, I'm with a group of people at a house. There's a few couples and there's a few single people. We're having like charcuterie and wine. And for the backdrop, they put on the Netflix roast of Tom Brady, right? And we're watching that. Now, before they put it on, I was given a warning that there's one of the couples that are here tonight that are very anti that type of comedy. So try not to make too many jokes or laugh too loud. Now, it was on in the background, so we weren't watching it fully. It was like we'd stop talking and maybe catch a joke and giggle. And I kept hearing this couple go, oh, that's awful. Oh, my goodness, that's tough. And we're veterans, right? So some of the veterans in the group, you know what our sense of humor is like. So I'm doing my best to hold my bearing. Then everybody stops to look at one scene, and it's a roast of Tom Brady. So there's an NFL audience, football players. The comedian Jeff Ross happens to grab his microphone, walk into the audience, and he says, we caught it at the right time. He says, Caitlyn Jenner was going to be here tonight, but she was a little confused about the tuck rule. Isn't that great? I fell out of my chair, and I got a stink eye from the couple that had problems with that, as if I wrote the joke. Can't make it up. One of the funniest things that, I could have told in that regard at this age. You'd think I would have learned to be a little bit more mature about certain things, but with a sense of humor and comedy, those things never go away. So my first duty station was at 29 Palms, California, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, India Company. So we finish SOI, we graduate, we're in our service Charlies, we get our sea bags, we get on a bus, and we drive up into the desert. Now, just to kind of go back in time, this is 1991. So we don't have the internet. I don't know much about what the Mojave Desert is. So I hear 29 Palms, and we're all thinking palm trees, beach. Can't make it up. True story. So we start driving up the mountain, and I remember seeing tumbleweeds and desert, and I was like, oh my God. And then people started saying, no, this is a desert training center. So when I arrive, it's a Friday, and we get off the bus. We walk up to what they call a CONAD at the time, Consolidated Admin. So this is before they had the IPACs and all that type of thing on bases, the Joint Reception Centers. You showed up to your Consolidated Admin for your battalion. And this Lance Corporal comes out there, he's piss and vinegar, calls the names. You're going to Kilo Company, you're going to Lima Company, you're going to Weapons Company. And then he goes, you're going to India Company, good luck. That's what he said. Now, I didn't know if he was doing that just to try to get a rise out of us, but he didn't say it to the other companies. And sure enough, as this is actually happening, we hear running cadence. This is like 15:30 in the afternoon. And here comes India Company running boots and utes back from the field, right? And they're all in formation, but they're straggled out. Like it looks like a disaster. And they're dying. So the company commander was wearing them out on a boots and utilities run to give them their liberty for the weekend. So this is what we see, right? So now I'm like, okay. They bring us up into the barracks and they tell us that we're going to be going to Bridgeport, California to do Mountain Warfare Training Center soon. So before we go, they take us out to the field. Now, we would go out to the field for 7 to 10 days at a time. I'll never forget this. They load us up on 5 tons back then, right? We get on 5 tons. We drive out to the field. I'm the only new Marine, a boot, that's in my platoon at the time, right? Or my section, I should say. We show up to the field, we get off the 5 tons, everybody just lays their gear down administratively, not even tactically, nobody's setting in. I don't know what to expect. I'm straight out of School of Infantry. They all lay down and go to sleep in the middle of the day. I was afraid to go to sleep because I thought they would be like, who are you to think you can just be so lazy? So I have my M60 Echo 3 machine gun. I have a AP brush, and I'm scrubbing the machine gun, like cleaning the weapon, sitting up, all straight. And I look up on top of the ridge, and the company commander is standing on top of the ridge with one of his platoon commanders with binoculars, and he's surveying the field to decide where he wants to put the company to start training. That's what I realized he was doing. But while he's doing that, he drops his trousers, completely naked, and no underwear on, and it was for him to air out his balls. So he's standing there with binoculars, talking to a platoon commander. Everybody's asleep. I look over to my left now. One of the staff sergeants is awake with a sergeant, and they're starting a fire in the desert. And the company commander yells down, "Put that fucking fire out." And the staff sergeant just kind of goes, "Forget it, sir." And I'm like, what Mickey Mouse organization did I just join, right? So I tell that story to say 2 weeks later, before we go to Bridgeport, we're in the barracks. I'm in a duty lounge. What I'm about to say, if I'm lying, I'm dying. I'm going to keep saying that because you can't make this stuff up. There was a Marine in the duty lounge that did not want to go to cold weather mountain warfare training. In front of me in the duty lounge, gave an e-tool to his buddy, put his foot and ankle up on a dresser, and had his buddy try to break his ankle with the e-tool in the duty lounge so he could get out of going to cold weather training. Literally. And I thought, what kind of training will we be doing if it's this bad where people are trying to break their own ankles? There's no way I would have done something like that. So then a week later, we have a new company gunnery sergeant check in, right? And then a new platoon sergeant show up. Both of these guys are former drill instructors. One's from Paris Island, one's from San Diego. The company gunny, Jim Moses, turned that company around overnight. Just vicious, aggressive, but loving and caring, funny, a Florida guy from the Everglades area, country boy. And overnight, we saw our company change into a very disciplined unit. So by the time we went to Bridgeport and we started building up for CAX and our first deployment, things started to change, and I felt like I was part of a very unique organization. Then we started getting the influx of new recruits that showed up, and training started to become much better, that's for sure. So 1993, we go on a UDP, right? So unit deployment program. So our unit, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, 3-7, we fly to Okinawa, Japan. And a lot of times the flyover battalions will go to Japan and maybe get on the 31st MU and you do all your workups. So we're up in, Okinawa, Japan, and we're doing training in Korea, the old Team Spirit, the Cobra Golds. We're doing all of this type of thing. And then they have the North Training Area, the NTA up in Okinawa, up in the jungle, right? And so you take your unit up there and you would do all these incredible, training exercises and learning tactics and techniques in the jungles, and you're in a bivouac area. Well, we're in a bivouac area and we have other Marines joined with our company to train. So they're attachments, for a lack of a better word. And one morning we wake up, and because people were upset with our company gunny, who Jim Moses was wreaking havoc. He was a former drill instructor from Paris Island. So everything was going to be, locked down. This is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to act. Platoon sergeants do this. And it was a tight ship. So whenever we ran the endurance course in NTA, which was a pretty adventurous, ferocious type of thing, in mud and deep, and it's freezing cold. Once we were done with that, our company gunny literally lined everybody up with a fire hose and sprayed us down to clean us off. Meanwhile, you see the officers jump in a Humvee, drive to the gym, take a shower, get in the sauna, and then come back while we're out there freezing, right? We always give them a hard time whenever we could when we talked about that. But in that bivouac site one morning, one of the adjacent units took a shit in the middle of the bivouac. Like literally, if you got the bivouac, you got the center area, there was a pile of shit in the middle of the bivouac site. So all we hear is our company gunny, Jim Moses, country boy from Florida. Hey, who's shit in my bivouac? And you hear laughter and chaos going on, and he gets everyone in formation, right? This isn't Okinawa. These are Marines. These aren't recruits. And he gets everyone in a formation, puts everybody in a push-up position, starts thrashing us like we're recruits. And he sits down on an MRE box in front of the turd and said, I will kill you motherfuckers until somebody fesses up who took this shit, right? And so we're laughing at the time, but now 5 minutes go by, your arms are shaking, you're sweating, no one wants to get up and challenge the gunny. And I remember my friends to my left and right were like, hey, I'm gonna admit it. And one of them stood up, Gunny, it was me. He goes, I know it wasn't you. It was one of these motherfuckers over here that's the adjacent unit. I know it. And guess what? I know who did it. So he wore us out and thrashed us until somebody fessed up. But you know what? He was lying. He didn't know who did it. Nobody fessed up. So that story happened. And then there is a 3-legged boar that is running around the training area. 3 legs. And everyone's talking about it. And our gunny was a hunter, right? And he's from Florida. He trapped alligators. He grabbed some comm wire. One of his former recruits was in our company from Kentucky named Eldridge. So the gunny and Eldridge go out into the bush, and he literally makes a trap out of comm wire, grabs some rice that he had found from one of our evening meals, and sets a trap. And we're all laughing, thinking there's no way he's going to catch this 3-legged boar. And he put a flashbang on it. Now we're in giant GP tents with the sides rolled up. We all go to bed late at night. And as we're asleep, a flashbang goes off, bam, in the jungle. And we hear the gunny, hey! And he grabs a knife and a flashlight and runs into the bush. Literally, he caught the 3-legged boar by one leg, and he literally stabbed it in the heart, stepped on it, killed it, drags it into the bivouac site, and cleans it, guts it, and then we have a pig roast. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, how awesome is that?
That's an awesome experience.
Yeah, it was great. So when I first arrived at 3-7, we had some Gulf War veterans. They had literally just gotten back from the Gulf War, which was a very, fast turnaround. And most of them were bitter. They were all ready to get out. And there wasn't shared combat experiences with them. They just would talk a lot of shit, punish you a little bit. Maybe one would be a mentor and take you off to the side, teach you something. I'll never forget, there was a 22-year-old Lance Corporal, kind of took me under his wing before he got out, just came back from the Gulf War. I'm 18, 19 years old. And he fell out of every physical event we did each morning for PT. And he would come up to me and say, when you get to be my age, it wears you out. It's hard. And being, 18 years old, thinking you just did 4 years in the Marine Corps, man, that's impressive. Of course, that's not true, right? But the thing that stood out the most, and as I've gotten older, I didn't realize how many Vietnam veterans were still active duty when I joined the Marine Corps. So in the early 90s, in 91, 92, 93, our battalion sergeant major was a Vietnam vet. Just do the math, right? When you go back in time to how long they had been in at the time. And I didn't know it. If I would have known at the time, I would have had so many conversations. I was on CAX one night doing training workups for deployment, and I was in a machine gun position at night, and our battalion sergeant major came by and laid down next to our machine gun and started just asking us questions and talking. And I was so nervous and uncomfortable with a sergeant major sitting down next to me as a Lance Corporal, I couldn't ask him questions. I didn't know what to ask. I just, yes, Sergeant Major, I, Sergeant Major, and listened to what he told us. But he was a Vietnam vet, and so was our battalion commander. And then we had a sergeant that literally came back into the Marine Corps to go to the Gulf War, and he was a Vietnam vet. He was older than the first sergeant, older than our company gunny. This sergeant did 4 years in the Marine Corps, got out, went back to work for whatever he was doing in life. The Gulf War breaks out, and he comes back in as a reservist to active duty, and he's a Vietnam veteran. And he's a sergeant, and he's like in his early 40s, and he went to the Gulf War. And I will never forget him running the obstacle course. We ran the obstacle course one day, and we're all cheering him on. He struggled, but man, was it motivating. And it turned into something that really resonated with me because he was showing by action. He was executing and giving us an example. It was a very powerful thing to watch. But he also didn't talk about it. So whenever you try to ask him questions about Vietnam, he was very humble. He didn't talk much about, his Vietnam experience. And we try to make the correlation between the Persian Gulf War, what he experienced, and the modern day Marine, and the tactics and the techniques and procedures, the gear, the optics, the weapons, how much has changed since Vietnam. Looking back, there wasn't much of a change with the weapons and gear that we had between those two time periods. Now, a lot has changed from then on, but at that time, not much. So I spent 5 years my first enlistment. So at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make a career. So when my contract came up, back then we were allowed to extend a year. So I extended an extra year to decide what I was going to do. So I'm in this unit as a sergeant now with 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. 17, 27, and 37 were the only battalions in 7th Marines at that time. 3, 4 didn't come until later on to 7th Marines, so it was only 3 battalions. And the way they did this was, if you had a battalion that was in Okinawa doing a UDP or 31st MU, you only had 2 battalions in the States. So the gear we had for weapons in the armory, the gear we had from supply, battalion supply, there was no SIF at the time. It was the battalions had their own supply. You only had enough gear and equipment for 2 battalions to be fitted, while 1 was in Okinawa. So if you were getting ready to go to Okinawa to replace that battalion, you turned all your gear in, and then you did a flyover and got new gear issued to you over there. Early 1994, Saddam Hussein was moving his troops around Iraq and Kuwait again. And so we got put onto an alert. So we were going to deploy earlier to go in that region. Well, that ended up getting shut down. So what happened was now we have 3 battalions and 29 palms, but only enough gear to fit 2 of the battalions. So there was a 1-month period where our battalion didn't have weapons, didn't have gear at all. So they were trying to figure out, how do we train? So someone came up with an idea from 29 Palms to go to Big Bear, California, and spend 10 days in Big Bear, going back to basics: land nav, patrolling techniques, ambush techniques, but with no weapons. So we go up there, and we all get sticks, and we take sticks and 550 cord and make handles, and we're patrolling with sticks and handguards, tripods made out of sticks from the trees. And we're on patrol doing this. And we have these GP tents set up. It's an admin bivouac, and we're out there for 10 days. Now, there's a stream not far from the GP tents, and they have little trout that are swimming about this big, right? 2 of the platoon sergeants got into a vehicle and went down into town in Big Bear, went into a supermarket and bought fish on ice that were like this big in the supermarket. And they brought it back up because our company gunny was a fisherman. And every night, before the sun went down, he'd run out into the river or the stream and he'd fish for these little trout. Well, they waited for the gunny to come out of doing something for training, and they came walking out of the tree line with these giant fish on their shoulders, and the gunny's eyes just lit up. He dropped everything he had, grabbed his fishing pole, and ran into the tree line. Just another great infantry practical joke. So the next morning, we're in the field, but the battalion and the regiment need a urinalysis done on our battalion and our company, but we're in the field in Big Bear. So they send the Sacco and his team up to Big Bear with all the urinalysis kits in the field. So our company gunny, being a Parris Island former drill instructor, has a brilliant idea. He puts us all in this open field. He stands in the middle, has everyone facing him in a big school circle. This is like 150 Marines, and grabs the piss bottles, and we all have to stand there and piss in bottles while he watches us in this circle. And you know there's always somebody with stage fright, so they can't do it. one of the most comical things that I ever was part of. It was absolutely hysterical. So now they need all the collected urine to go back down to 29 Palms, right? The company gunny pulls me aside and says, Sergeant Courville, you know what? I want you to drive the company commander's POV with the sacco and all the urine down to 29 Palms. You can take his truck, stay there tonight, get a shower, get some food, come back tomorrow. I was like, not a bad deal, right? Now, just before I left, the company commander had this old Toyota that he had 180,000 miles on, he was bragging about. So I get in this Toyota. I have the Sacco and his assistant, all the urine. We're driving down the back of Big Bear. And as we're going down the road, a piston shoots out of the hood of the truck and smoke just starts going everywhere. I have to pull over. We're at the bottom of the hill in the desert. Pull over. I've got all this urine. I've got the Sacco with me. We have no cell phones at the time. There's no walkie-talkies, no radios. We're just out there dead in the water, basically in the desert, so to speak. And I don't know how she was out there, but one of our chief warrant officers from NBC, his wife happened to be driving in the middle of nowhere in the desert, coming back from like Victorville, pulls over, sees us, and gives us a ride with all the urine back to battalion. So I'm a nervous wreck. The company commander and the executive officer come to 29 Palms in another vehicle, and they pick me up to bring me back to Big Bear. And I'm uncomfortable because I feel like the company commander's thinking I blew your truck up. You were probably driving crazy and all this type of stuff. We get up to the field. I don't see any Marines. I'm like, where are all the Marines at? Are they out training? They must be training with their sticks out in the woods. I get out of the truck. I walk around the main GP tent. The company gunny who had heard the story about me blowing up the vehicle had already shared this with everyone. He has the whole company waiting for me like in a horseshoe formation. I walk around the corner and they all start applauding me for blowing up the company commander's truck because it got him out of the field to keep us from doing all the stupid shit we were doing with sticks. And then we got the buses to come and grab us and bring us back to 29 Palms. So I saved the day by blowing up the company commander's truck. I'm not sorry. So I had some early mentors when I was a corporal that said, if you pick up sergeant before 4 years, you should think about making this a career because you're ahead of your peer group. That might not sound like an incredible feat now, but at that particular time, we had 6-year contractors back then, where if you enlisted with 6 years, you were guaranteed corporal at 2 years, guaranteed lance corporal at 18 months. And if you picked up sergeant under 4 years, that was kind of unheard of in the infantry in the early 1990s. I picked up sergeant at 3 years and 11 months. And I had been meritoriously promoted to corporal, so I had this mentor that said, you need to give this some thought about a career. And I kind of was leaning that way already. So I extended for a year, but I knew the next step for me had to be something monumental. I needed something that was going to catapult me even more than I already was seeing in my career at this point. A lot of people were saying you should go security forces, barracks duty. All those things are great. Instructor duty. But if you don't do one of the major special duty assignments, i.e. drill instructor, recruiting duty, those were the two big ones at the time. You'll regret it later. Do it while you're young. So I knew I wanted to be a drill instructor. I said, if I do a tour as a drill instructor and I decide to get out and not make a career, I'll be satisfied that I did both of those things, infantry and drill instructor. At the time, the drill instructor duty was only 2 years. It wasn't 3 at the time. It was 2 years, right? So my first assignment as a drill instructor was a 2-year tour. And I re-enlisted for those orders and went down to MCRD San Diego. The cool thing for me was I was a recruit in Mike Company, 3rd Recruit Training Battalion. And then I was a drill instructor for 3rd Recruit Training Battalion, Mike Company. And then fast forward 10 or 15 years later, I become a first sergeant for 3rd Recruit Training Battalion, Mike Company in Parris Island. So there was this really nice story that kind of felt great, like a bookend to both of those situations. Drill instructor school in the Marine Corps goes through an ebb and flow. of, you hear stories where they're treated like recruits to where now they're being treated like they're going to one of the staff academies, to back to being treated like recruits, to a hybrid, to this, to that, depending on who the commanding general is, depending on who RTR is. I've seen it all. I've been experienced and exposed in all of those ebb and flows over a career. But when I went to drill instructor school as a young sergeant, they didn't treat us like recruits all the time, but there were phases they took you into training and teaching you and treating you like recruits. They were still ITing us at drill instructor school like they would a recruit, but they stopped that around the same time in the mid 1990s, late 1990s. And the reason is because of the crucible. So my first tour as a drill instructor was 2 years, but my first year was all on the old program, which we called the basic warrior training. This is whenever you would go up into the field for 2 weeks and you would do all the things that you eventually would do in Marine combat training. You were doing recruit training. There was no crucible, and you weren't called a Marine until the day you graduated. So my second year as a drill instructor was the new crucible. It was all brand new. So I went through all the prototypes to where the first time I went through a crucible as a drill instructor was completely different than the second time, to where we had little, spies that walked around evaluating the crucible. And guess what? It was more of a drill instructor evaluation at the beginning of that, to where you would come back for what they call a hot wash, and you would hear stories that we watched drill instructor Sergeant Courville yelling at the crucible squad like they were recruits and not treating them like Marines. And then I would get filleted. And I'm like, I did all of what I was told to do to treat them like a Marine, but they're tired. They haven't been sleeping. You're depriving them of sleep. You're depriving them of what they eat. And they're sluggish. And when I say private so-and-so, which is all new to us, grab your squad, get them on the road. We're stepping in 2 minutes to the next event. If they didn't meet that time hack, what do you think you do as a drill instructor? Hey, grab it, get up and move. When the evaluator saw me doing that, they think I'm not teaching them how to be a leader, I'm taking over. So we had this whole dilemma going on. We had to cam me up with camouflage paint the first time I was on the crucible. Then we weren't allowed to eat any MREs at all. We had to eat the same as the recruits. Then it changed to where we could eat as much as we wanted. And then it just continued to have this ebb and flow because it was a new phase of what we were trying to learn. I got on board with it. I thought it was a very valuable thing to go through. But the reason I share that is going back to when I went to drill instructor school. When I first went through, they would take you to Camp Pendleton and they started treating you like recruits up at Camp Pendleton. As soon as we got off the bus to do something in Edson Range, the instructors treated us like recruits, and they hadn't done that the entire time while we were down in San Diego yet. They were harsh, they were strict, timelines, punctual, but they hadn't treated us like recruits yet until we went to second phase up in Edson Range. And then they would take us on a hike and they would start yelling at us and treating you like recruits. They were trying to teach you. I didn't know this at the time. I thought they were just harassing us, but they were trying to show us what you need to be doing as a drill instructor when your recruits are on a hike and they're struggling and they're dragging, right? And so it took me some time before I could put that together. I graduate, and then a year later when the crucible was starting to happen, I remember working as a drill instructor and seeing this formation run by, and it was drill instructor school, and they all had shaved heads. Now, when I went through, we had to have short hair, like almost a little flat top or a crew cut, barely any hair. But they didn't demand that we were shaved bald. A year later, they go running by all bald, and they are treating them like recruits. I mean, the way they stood, the way they answered, the way they responded, all like recruits. So I saw that ebb and flow. And then I was a drill instructor school first sergeant at Parris Island, 10, 15, 20 years later. And I went through some of those same, gripes and ups and downs, and the commanding general coming down and telling us how we were going to treat them and what the curriculum was going to be. It's where politics really gets involved in the military. We always hear that.
Yeah.
That there's politics. Being the drill instructor, you're told you have to be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not. But at the same time, it's a role you're playing. There's things that you have to create in a certain situation to where you want your recruits to respond. And sometimes that might not be your normal personality because you want to invoke chaos and stress, and you want to have this energy and this vibe. And so there's a lot of people that struggle with that when they're drill instructors because they don't want to be a certain way because it's not their personality. It's almost like having an introvert and you're demanding that they're an extrovert in a social setting. And I've been around people that can do that and you would never know they're an introvert. But what you don't see is when they leave that area, they crash because they need to recharge their battery. The same thing happens with drill instructors and they hardly sleep. You know, we're working some crazy, ridiculous hours and you're being demanded of a lot. And when you're not sleeping overnight, if you're on a 3 drill instructor team every 3rd night, you're there until the recruits go to sleep. And you're there for some time after they go to sleep to do your administrative responsibilities, security checks and all that type of thing. And no matter where you live, if it's close or far, you're driving home, you're grabbing something to eat, probably forcing food down your throat, and then you're going to sleep and you're up before you even realize it, like 3 or 4 hours. And then you come back to work and you can still smell your cologne or your lotion or whatever you wear that you were wearing the day before on your uniform when you walk into the squad bay. It's like that type of world, and you never could get a break for yourself. And so for me at that young age, I went young, and I was only 23 years old. And when I think about that now, it's like, wow. And remember, 10 years before that, when I was 13, is when I made my first transformation from going from a shy, overweight kid to getting in shape. And then 10 years later, I'm a drill instructor in the Marine Corps. I've already been in the Marine Corps 6 years. I've been in the fleet. I've been in the infantry, I've deployed, and now I'm in shape. I've gotten myself in shape. I had a very hard struggle even when I joined the Marine Corps to where I could run fast sprints, but I wasn't a great distance runner. I had to work on that. I fell out of a hike in the infantry, and it was so embarrassing for me because I couldn't understand how to walk the way they wanted me to walk in deep sand or trying to stay behind this Marine. And I would start to run, and they would always yell, "Don't run." So I got embarrassed again, just like the first transformation I had when I fell down in the squat rack. So I trained myself to get better at it. Now, it didn't happen overnight. It took about a year, but after about a year of devotion to that, I never looked back. I can wear a full kit, I can run, I can hike, I can do all of those things that are required of you to do. So I had that bravado as a drill instructor, and I was 23 years old. I had nothing but testosterone, you know, piss and vinegar. I wanted to just destroy people. I wanted to be aggressive with them. But there was still something inside of me that wanted to teach something because I wanted them to have the same kind of mindset that I had about loving the Marine Corps and what they could do to be better. And if they were sluggish, you smell it. It's like sharks in the water. We always say a shark feeding frenzy, blood in the water. You go after them. And not every drill instructor possesses the same type of energy and quality. We try to bring it out of them. You try to teach them in the school, which is hard to do because drill instructor school is basically an indoctrination of what you're going to be dealing with. And the only thing new that's taught to you when you go to drill instructor school, literally, is what they would call the SOP, the standard operating procedures, and the RTO. Things change over time, right? And that's the only thing that's new that's taught to you when you go to drill instructor school. Everything else is a refresher, a reminder of what you've already been through or been taught in your career, whether it's drill, physical training, and you get an adaptation and an indoctrination of what the area is about. So my first tour as a drill instructor, again, was a 2-year tour. My first year was the old BWT schedule. The second year was the new Crucible introduction. So we used to bring the recruits up for 2 weeks in the field to do what they do now in Marine combat training, where you're probing for mines and you're in GP tents, you're standing fire watch, you're going to the rifle range, you're going on patrols, you're hiking. You're doing all of that that's associated with tactics and learning the fire team essentials, right? So at night, whenever you put your recruits on fire watch and they rovered around the area, you had drill instructors in their own GP tent. That was the duty drill instructor for the night. Now, on the West Coast, drill instructors still wore their campaign cover out in the field. On the East Coast, they would transition from a campaign cover to a soft cover. So the beautiful thing for us as drill instructors on the West Coast is at night, we would take our campaign cover off, put a soft cover on, and try to intermingle through the recruits because they wouldn't know who you were. And we'd try to get them on something, catch them doing something they shouldn't have done. Go up to the fire watch and start talking to them to see if they would talk to you and be loose and not secure the area, right? So one night, I'm the duty drill instructor, and a recruit got a box of chocolate chip cookies sent. The senior drill instructor was not happy with the way the platoon was acting. So before he went home, he took the cookies, which he wasn't supposed to do, and he threw them in the trash, threw them in the dumpster. They're not having them tonight. So he leaves, and I'm the duty drill instructor. Now, I knew that some recruit was going to go through that dumpster that night and try to find those cookies. Even though they were thrown in a dumpster, it was full of a bunch of nasty stuff, right? So I put a soft cover on, and I start walking around all the tents. I mean, these are the old shelter half tents. And I go to each tent, and I go, hey. And I'd hear a recruit inside go, because you can see the lights underneath the shelter half because they're writing letters in the middle of the night, right? Hey, yeah, you want some cookies? No. I'm like, damn. I went through like 6 tents, and all of our recruits kept saying no. And I thought, man, we have a disciplined platoon. I can't get over this. I'm actually impressed. And I'm a green belt drill instructor. So I'm like, man, I want to find somebody doing something wrong. So I get to the 7th tent and I say, you want some cookies? And the first guy up front goes, no. But I hear the guy in the back go, yeah, I'll take some motherfucking cookies. I said, stick your hand out here so I can hand them to you. And the shelter half, there were 3 buttons they undid, and I see a hand come out, right? I stand up and I get in this this posturing position, and I'm thinking, I'm going to snatch this recruit's hand. I'm going to pull him out of that shelter half. I literally grab his hand, and in one swipe, I pulled him through a slit. It looked like the tent gave birth to a recruit. I literally pulled him out, and when he landed on the ground, I started going crazy, yelling at him, and I see all the lights all start turning off, all the flashlights underneath the shelter halves, because this kid literally was trying to get a cookie. So I called him Cookie Monster from that day on. I mean, there would be things where I'd call his name, and he'd have to make a Cookie Monster noise. And fast forward, it's like 30 years ago, and he messages me. He found me on like social media, and he said, hey, this is Cookie Monster. I just want to thank you for the examples that you set when you were my drill instructor, even though you called me Cookie Monster. My children love it. So these are the stories that, are amazing, that decades later find themselves coming back to you, even if I had forgotten about them. But that was a very unique situation. I found myself in a very unique position where I was fortunate to get meritoriously promoted leaving the drill instructor duty as a staff sergeant. And I was married at the time. Our first child had just been born. She was 10 days old. And the Marine Corps decided they wanted to send me to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba as a platoon sergeant, which was a great opportunity. But being the fact that I was just leaving the drill instructor duty, after 2 years, I have a brand new baby. It's a 1-year unaccompanied tour. Didn't sound and sit well with me. But that's when I first learned that there are orders, not requests. And when you say the needs of the Marine Corps, okay, I got it. So I, of course, accepted the orders. And this is a time in my life where I learned the value of enjoying the moment. But I didn't enjoy it until a year had gone by. So my entire year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, once I PCS'd and left there, I realized that all of my stories and things that I talked about and lessons I had learned that were very valuable weren't from the drill instructor duty I'd done. It was from Cuba. And I had to take a hard look at myself and say, why is that? It's because I was in such a rush for the year to be over. So I was back with my family, back doing something outside of what I was doing in Cuba. And I was proficient, I was efficient in my duty. I did all of those things, but I learned a valuable lesson. So being a platoon sergeant there, you have in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and this is in 1998, you have the leeward side and the windward side, and you have a very large fence line that goes around the base, right? It's separated by a bay. And so you have Marines on observation posts. And across that fence line, you see the Cuban observation post, and they're looking at us and we're looking at them. And they send out patrols at night. And we send our patrols out at night along the fence line. And there would be some very tense situations where our patrols ran into them, even with a fence line in between us, right? At that time, they had just taken tanks away. There used to be tanks at Guantanamo Bay, but they were now removed. And so our rotation was, we got every other weekend off, but you can't leave the base, right? Because you're on a closed, confined base in a communist country. So you would have 1 full week of fence line duty as a platoon, and then 1 week where you would do live fire training, and you would do your target tactics and your engagements with live fire. And then you would have a weekend off where you could go and have recreational sports, diving, snorkeling, that type of thing. Now it's a Navy base, right? So I'm a staff sergeant. It's an E6, but as we know, the Navy doesn't recognize an E6 the way the Marine Corps recognizes an E6 as a staff sergeant. So I lived in the barracks with my Marines. So I was all around all of my platoon in the barracks, So at 2 o'clock in the morning, when I have my laundry bag and go to the laundry inside the barracks, and all the laundry washing machines were filled up, and there were 2 bags on top of it for the 2 guys waiting to do laundry after them. I lived in that world after just coming from having my own place with a family, and this is where I'm living. So, don't cry for me, Argentina, right? It's what we enlisted to do, and that's what I did. But while we were there, here's what really stood out to me when I was in Cuba. And this is before OIF and OEF, right? This is 1998, 1999. We have live minefields on our side, and there's live minefields on the Cuban side. And I would go out to an observation post with my Marines and standing there watching the Cubans and what they were doing on their fence line. And we would have Cubans that would jump across the fence or run across the minefields to get to us to seek asylum. I literally watched Cubans run through a minefield and hit a mine and disintegrate in red dust in front of me. Literally, every time you would hear the red mist theory, I watched it happen, sitting on the observation post as a staff sergeant. Boom, boom. Even saw some deer run across and hit landmines. One time at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was on an observation post on the bay with my Marines, observing the area, and it's shark-infested waters. And they literally, Cubans that wanted to seek asylum, would lather themselves in motor oil, wearing a Speedo, and swim across shark-infested waters. They think it's a shark repellent, apparently, to come to us. The reason I bring that up is there's so many people that complain about, our way of life in America. But you see people like this that are doing everything they can to get away from the atrocities that we don't even see that they go through to try and seek asylum with us. We watch that. But they had minefield maintenance down there at the time. And minefield maintenance, their job was to start pulling out the mines on our side. They started doing that and got rid of them eventually. Now, minefield maintenance, you had to be a sergeant or above. You couldn't be below the rank of sergeant, right? 8 hours a day, these guys were in the minefield pulling live mines out. And at night, they would be in a bar that was on the base. And I would see a few of them because I had friends that were in minefield maintenance. And, big mustaches and just drinking beer. And they were a complete mess. And I say that in a good way. It was like what you would see now with veterans who've been exposed to a lot of things in combat. And just they have their own little nucleus of who they hang around. And that's what they want to be around, because those are the people that understand what they're going through. It was shocking and very unique to see. So when I received my orders for Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the orders clearly stated that you could fly in civilian attire to the island. But once you arrived, you change into your service alphas and you check in, as according to all Marines do when they report to a new duty station. But what I didn't know until I got there is we didn't have company first sergeants. We had company gunnery sergeants, right? And they were basically the first sergeant of the company. And we have 2 large platoons in our company, right? And I have 1 platoon as a platoon sergeant. That's what I'm going to report to. So when I arrive, I'm in civilian attire, as the order states, and then I walk into a bathroom that's in the hangar bay, and I change into my service alphas. The company gunny, aware of who was on the inbound roster, had a spy on the other side that literally would say, "Your boy got off the plane in civilian attire." Even though I changed and I reported into him in my service alphas, that's not what he wanted to hear. And I'm oblivious to this. So I walk in, I'm this young, brand new promoted staff sergeant. I probably had 8 years in the Marine Corps, I think at the time, just coming off the drill field. I'm excited. I'm in great shape. I see him and I walk up and I go, "Good morning, Gunnery Sergeant, Staff Sergeant Courville reporting for duty." Just politely, right? Because I'm not reporting to him officially yet until we walk in his office. He looks at my hand, looks back at me, doesn't shake my hand. "Come in." I walk in, I sit down, and he goes, "Give me your SRB." I hand him my SRB. He's not looking at me. He starts flipping through my SRB. And a country boy, right? He goes, "You got any page 11s?" I said, "No, Gunnery Sergeant." And he goes, "Well, what's this right here?" I don't know what he was talking about. He flips around my SRB, and it basically, when you re-enlisted, you had to sign a page 11 entry saying that you understand the UCMJ, right? And I said, "Well, that's when I re-enlisted." He goes, "Well, I've re-enlisted. I don't have that in mind." And I'm like, "I don't know what to say to you right now, right?" And then he goes, "How's your PT?" And I said, "It's fine, Gunnery Sergeant. I just got off the drill field, not recruiting duty." And he goes, "I was a recruiter? What is that supposed to mean?" I thought, this is not going very well for me as a new job hire, right? So I get my check-in sheet. I get up, I walk out, I go over to what they call the White House. It's the Marine barracks, right? Full bird colonel, and they got all the S shops, the S1, the S2, 3, 4. And I walk into the S3 and I'm signing everything in my service office and I go, "Hey, Marines, where can I get toilet paper? I'm not sure where the S4 is." And they're like, "Oh, don't worry about that. Just ask Sergeant Major." And I thought, why would I ask Sergeant Major for toilet paper for the barracks? That sounds ridiculous. So I walk around and check in. I finally check in with the Sergeant Major, who was great. He was a Vietnam veteran, as a matter of fact, right? And I was mature enough at this point where I asked him some questions about Vietnam, because I'd learned my lesson to ask questions when somebody has experience like that, because there wasn't many left. And on the way out, I said, "Sergeant Major, can I get some toilet paper for the barracks?" He flipped the script. He tore me up. He wore me out. What I found out was the Marines set me up. There was a sergeant major that worked in the S4. So they were telling me to go see Sergeant Major, but they weren't pausing between the two. So I go and ask the Sergeant Major of the barracks for toilet paper for the barracks. He wore my ass out, kicked me out of the office. And of course, he was great to me later on and talked to me about some things. But that was my introduction into checking into Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And so I mentioned that I learned after leaving that tour how valuable it was for me, but I wasn't enjoying the moment. In our platoon, we had a rifle. I had like 65 Marines in a platoon. That's large for a rifle platoon. I had a rifle section. I had 81 millimeter mortars, and I had a cat section, right, with vehicles. And we did exercises all the time that were defensive exercises, all tactics, all involvement in how we operated. And I learned so much that became valuable to me moving forward when I was in Iraq at a higher level and rank and position in an infantry company. But I didn't realize how much I was being taught at that time, right? So I go out to the fence line, which was normal. I would either run out there or I would take a Humvee, tactically go out and check the post, talk to the Marines. What are they seeing? What are they doing? And we had a QRF, right? So Quick Reaction Force was always on standby in case we had, an invasion come over the fence line. So I go out to the fence line, and after we come back, I tell the driver, "Turn everything back in. I'll see you inside," right? I didn't tell him specifically what to turn in. I just said, "Turn everything in that we had drawn out of the armory, the comm shop, etc. And I'll see you at the switch when we do our turnover and our debrief." Well, a Kick 13 back in those days was what we used to fill crypto, right? And it went missing. The next day, I found out that it was not turned in. And the comm section brings it up to our commander. Then it has to go up to the colonel. This is secret fills that are in this device, and we're on this fence line. So you can imagine how stressed I got. I was immediately read my rights. By the way, I've had rights read to me at every rank in the Marine Corps, right? That's not uncommon. But I had my rights read to me, and I was under investigation. And during the investigation, we found the Kick 13 sitting outside the office, like somebody had found it or had it and then just turned it in. So that was a big thing for me because I thought my career was over. And the full bird colonel wrote a non-punitive letter of caution on me, basically stating how irresponsible I was leading up to that. Now, I had never experienced that yet in my career. You know, I was getting promoted. I was meritoriously promoted. You know, in 1995 was the first time I had received fitness reports. And I think they changed the fitness report format in 1999. So from 95 to 99, you're being evaluated not only against your peers, but you're being told where you rank. You're being told when you get evaluated, you're 1 of 4 sergeants or you're 4 of 4 sergeants. And to get better, I need you to do these things. You know, better shape, look better in your uniform, learn your tactics, learn your job, take more courses, right? You name it. So your ego is getting fed because you're being told, how do I go from 4 to the number 1 sergeant? And those things kind of dissolved later. We didn't have that. So to get a non-putative letter of caution was an eye-opener for me. It scared me. I thought my career was over. It wasn't. It was a teaching tool from this colonel. I'll never forget it. And I'd seen him many years later, like decades later after he retired, and he's since passed away. But I remember telling him how valuable that lesson was for me. And I always hung that in my office. So when I had in my office, as I moved up in the Corps, you know, your accolades and your pictures, your awards, whatever it might have been, I always had that non-punitive letter of caution hanging up next to my awards because it was always a story. So what people don't realize when you're in and you walk into someone's office and it's decorated with all their accolades, we always say it's a love me wall, right? Which is true. There's an ego behind it. But a mentor of mine taught me this, where when a young Marine walks in and you're on the phone or you're on your computer or you're filling something out and they're looking at the things on your wall, it makes them interested to where they ask you about it. And once they ask you about something, you tell them the story. You just did something incredible. You inspired someone, you taught them, you gave them something to think about. Maybe it's a duty station they didn't know existed. Maybe they realize, hey, I thought you were Superman. I didn't think you got in trouble, and you have a non-punitive letter of caution for being irresponsible. Can you tell me about that? So it's a valuable thing. So I get orders to officer candidate school, and you have to be a former drill instructor to work at officer candidate school. And you have candidates that are on different programs, and one in particular, if you have a direct commission program, that means the candidates go through their time at OCS, and when they graduate, they're directly commissioned to a second lieutenant. And that means that they're all college graduates already, so they're in the platoon, and you're training them. And one particular day, I was teaching drill in the squad bay, and this one candidate could not learn the new drill movement with the weapon that I was teaching. And if you are teaching drill and you see all of your candidates or recruits and one makes a simple mistake, you catch it right away. You go after that. So this one candidate kept making mistakes. So I've got everyone online in the squad bay, and I called him an idiot. And because, you know, college graduate, going to be a future officer, he had the audacity to say, "This candidate is not an idiot. This candidate is well educated." And he's looking at me as he says it, which is like no-go criteria in that world for us, right? I don't know what came over me. I sprinted into the duty hut, came back out with a Webster's dictionary, and I opened it up, all animated, and I flipped the pages, and I found idiot. And I go, "Read it," in front of the whole platoon. Now, I hadn't looked at the definition yet. He opens it up, and I see him take a breath to go to read it, and I see like a little smirk on his face, and I almost see like an eye roll, like he's like, "Oh, God." He says, "A person mentally inferior or capable to learn something new, a blockhead." And I could hear all this laughing with the whole platoon. You know, they're trying not to laugh. I grab the book, I slam it, and I go, "I rest my case." And this guy's face, he just started sweating. He knew I got him. I had him by the balls at that point, right? So I get him online, and I start teaching him the drill movement again. It was inspection arms. And he kept screwing it up even more. And we've all got those stories where the more time you spend with a recruit or a candidate and you're teaching them how to walk naturally and march, they start doing what we call the Frankenstein, where the arm and the leg go the same direction, and they look stupid. I cannot tell you how many times that has happened to me, and there's an idiot like that in front of me. And when I hear someone say, "Thank you for your service. You guys really defend our freedom," I think, of guys like this being told, thank you for your service. And I'm like, you have no idea what's going on here. And then I had a candidate stop me in my tracks though. So a flip of the script. As drill instructors, we have all these great stories where we catch recruits, we get on them, candidates. I had a candidate stop me in my tracks as a drill instructor. He came back from sick call and I snatched his sick call chick. And he says, this candidate is on rack rest. So I start going ballistic on him, right? And then in the middle of yelling at him, I stopped, I paused, and I thought, rack rest? He's right. Why do we call it bed rest? We say it's a rack on the bed. You know, all this disparity goes on in my head. And then I had to come up with something and say, hey, only, weak asses that can't perform in training are put in a bed. Those of us that train hard are put in a rack. Now get your ass over here and lay down in the bed. So that's how I kind of recover from that. But I remember walking away from that going, hey, this is funny. He caught me because we call drill instructors hats as a lingo, a slang. But we wear a cover, not a hat. But can you imagine calling a drill instructor a cover instead of a hat? I mean, all these things just started kind of going through my head about what we get used to and we're numb to, in the Marine Corps. I had a unique opportunity where, if you haven't heard of the Wharton Business School, very prestigious school, right? Ivy League. And if I remember correctly, you would have someone that completed their graduate program and a master's go into the workforce for 2 to 4 years, I think was the requirement, then apply for the Wharton Business School. So they were savvy and older and experienced when they were in the Wharton Business School. Well, they wanted to come down to Officer Candidate School in Quantico and have a boot camp type of experience and do some of the events we do. So they had a lottery and like 50 of them came down, and I happened to be one of the guys in charge of this, where we put them through some boot camp Officer Candidate School stuff. But the most important lesson, I'll never forget this, we have leadership stalls. We do these in recruit training, but in Officer Candidate School, you have 14 leadership stalls where you walk into a stall and there's all these different troubleshooting equations, right? You're given a scenario, you're a team of 4, one person's appointed as the team leader. You have 10 minutes after completion of reading the scenario to try and accomplish the problem. And that problem could be, there's barrels, there's poles, there's pipes, there's dummies, there's all these types of things. You have to get over a river crossing, you name it, right? The Wharton Business School students, literally, when the team leader was appointed, they would spend 8 minutes, roughly, trying to sell the other team members on their plan to make sure everyone felt included and that your idea was heard and what do you think before we execute. And they spent 2 minutes, if not less, executing. Not one of the students, with all that knowledge, all that experience, completed one of the leadership stalls. Now, you take a Marine officer candidate who's going through weeks of training, indoctrination, being evaluated, put in leadership positions and being taught and mentored by their instructors. They would have a team leader appointed after the scenario was read, and they would spend 1 minute saying, here's the plan, this is your role, execute. 8 minutes of execution, and they had a 75% completion. When we got into a debrief at the end of this visit, and we shared that with the dean that came down, they acted like we had, cured cancer. They couldn't believe that something so simple was so obvious to us. And that's the power of the Marine Corps leadership. The things you're taught, how you're inspired, how you educate and mentor each other. It was a very powerful thing. The team leader knew the strengths of the people on his team or her team. These are the people that are on my team. We've trained and worked together just like the Wharton Business School students have worked together, right? But I know your strengths and I'm put in charge. So I'm going to be decisive. I've got 10 minutes, not 10 days. So I'm going to assign you to your strengths to get this accomplished. Here's the task I want you to give. Now we need to work this together and flow it out. So I think, you hear a lot of people in any profession, right? Whether it's military or you name it, corporate, private, government, city, state, where people will say out loud what a leadership trait might be, But executing it and showing it by example are two different things. So when I watched that with the officer candidates compared to the Wharton Business School students, it was right there in front of me as a decisive action. We knew we had to make a decision to make this accomplished and make things happen. Therefore, here's the plan, and let's lay it out. September 11th, 2001. It was a beautiful sunny day on the East Coast, as we know. And I was at Quantico, Virginia, OCS. And I walked across the parade deck and I walked into the OCS headquarters, and there were a group of Marines gathered around a TV. And as we walked up, this is real time East Coast. So one plane had hit a tower. And the reports that were coming in, that's been well documented. We thought it was maybe a commuter plane, a private plane that hit the tower. And we're all watching this. And then we see the second tower hit. And then obviously it's a whole different reaction. And I went to Q-Town. On Quantico, there's a place called Q-Town where it's literally on the base, and it's like coffee shops and businesses, and you can have breakfast. Good friend of mine, Charles Jackson, he and I went to Q-Town, and we were having breakfast and just kind of talking about, our orders were ending at OCS. So we were like, hey, what does this mean? Where are we going? Is this going to keep us from leaving the area? Are we on hold? Who attacked us? And as we're in the middle of this conversation, having breakfast, we hear chaos and pandemonium in the streets. It looked like World War Z had not come out, obviously, for another 15 years, but it reminded me of that movie where it looked like people in chaos in the streets, like Independence Day. And the Pentagon had just been hit, which is only right up the road. So now we think the world's coming to an end. And I walked around the corner, there was a coffee shop, and I went in there and talked to a good friend of mine that was in there and kind of helped comfort her. All the satellites were down, so cell phones, even though they were old flip phones, we couldn't get through it to our families. And, it really put things in perspective. But what I remember the most about that was not feeling fear. There was like a calling, and I think everyone at that time remembers that. Here I am, a staff sergeant with, 10 years in the Marine Corps, and I know we're about to go to war. Don't know with who yet, but I know we're going to war. So, we're up there calling our monitors. We're going to see our monitors in person to try to get orders. And, that's a whole nother story. But I ended up getting orders to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in 29 Palms. And I didn't request to go back to 29 Palms. I'd requested an infantry battalion. And I got just sent back to 29 Palms. I remember when I got the orders, I thought, oh my goodness, I've already been at 29 Palms for 5 years. In the early to mid 90s, why am I going back to a place I've been already? And a mentor of mine later in my career told me this, not too much longer after this. He said, when you start choosing duty location over duty assignment, it's time for you to get out because you're not devoted to the mission statement. Now, there are people that will disagree with what I just said. I get that. But for me, I understood that. I would not want to be at Camp Pendleton on the beach in California in a job that was thankless and didn't have satisfaction. I would rather be in another duty station that wasn't the most pristine location, but have a very sexy assignment. That makes the difference, And again, their order is not request. So I got sent to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in 29 Palms, and it by far was the best job I've ever had. I did 4 years there. And I'm even wearing a lapel pin right now to showcase how important it was. Being a company gunny in the infantry during combat, there is no comparison. I've had some great, great places I've been. I've had some great units. And the more I talk to veterans and the more I talk to Marine veterans, not everyone experienced a great duty assignment. They've had good ones. They've had some that are better than others. And there was a phrase we used to use all the time that the worst duty station is the one you're at. The best one is the one you just left. And as long as you can get your mindset out of that, maybe you can have a very different look on what you're doing in the moment to enjoy that time. But there was nothing comparable in combat to being a company gunny in the infantry. And 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines was a game changer for me. So when I report to 3-4 Kilo Company, I'm not there very long before we're already in Kuwait. And we knew that we were going to be doing something in Iraq. And we were in Kuwait for probably 2.5 months. We show up there with nothing but desert. So all of our GP tents that we built up, the way we shaved, the way we hygiened, everything from scratch. There were no engineers. There was no KBR, none of that. So for 2.5 months, and we had to be creative about how we trained, how we did all of those things every day to make sure your people weren't getting sick. You know, those sandstorms and living in those conditions after a while, you know, if you're not really taking care of yourself personally, you can have people go down with sickness, and that spreads in those GP tents. Now, when I arrived, I had 12 years in the Marine Corps, right? I'm a gunnery sergeant. I hadn't been to combat yet. I had been exposed to danger. I'd been deployed in places that were questionable, that kind of thing, but no combat. Cuba was probably the most intense place just because of the presence of, you know, an enemy force when we did patrols at night. But the Marines that I had in 3-4, they're all first 4 years, if not, you know, your platoon sergeants on their second and third. And everyone was pretty much in the same kind of experience and exposure. So we don't know what we're going to experience and get into once we, you know, go into combat. Let alone, do we know what we are going to be doing? Are we actually going to cross into Iraq? So all these things psychologically, you know, are affecting you. But at that point in my career, I was starting to really perfect how I handled myself and how I looked, how I carried myself, positive attitude. I was an aggressive gunny, you know, very aggressive. And I thought that was important. I was emulating some of the gunnery sergeants that I looked up to in my career, you know, and I learned, like we all do, you imitate, you're going to fail, but you have to emulate your leaders. That's a big thing. I needed to be who I was. And again, the most satisfying job I had was being a company gunny. Now, it's a very unique time because I watched so many changes with gear and equipment happen in those 4 years than had happened in the Marine Corps over the past 25 to 30 years, from the Vietnam gear and that type of thing, to where I'm literally getting packs that are a Type A prototype, a Type B prototype, a Type C prototype, day packs included, issued to my company, and I have rosters on which one has which type because they wanted to have surveys on which ones were more durable. They were putting it to the test. SAPI plates were new. No one had had a SAPI plate yet. So we didn't have enough to go around the battalion. So the policy was, going into the crossing of the line of departure into Iraq, was only the people in the TC hatch of the AAVs would have SAPI plates, and the people that were in Humvees, because everyone else was buttoned up inside the AAVs as our infantry Marines, right? So I'm in a high-back Humvee in OIF-1. Everyone else is in AAVs, right? Now, one of the lessons that I learned from Cuba, I brought onto this position, and I had a wonderful battalion commander and sergeant major, BP McCoy and Dave Howell, phenomenal leaders. And Colonel McCoy not only encouraged, demanded, and put mission essential task lists to standard with small unit leaders and target engagement and tactics from every level, but he had this philosophy about transition triage and casualty evacuation, that we have to rehearse this as much as we rehearse our battle drills. Now, that's something in the past that we didn't really rehearse. We might have had a POLIS litter where we took our casualty back on a patrol or something like that, or just talked about it. But we're really doing this. So for 2.5 months in Kuwait, you know, I'm rehearsing and practicing this to where it was muscle memory. And I had my Humvee. I had 2 AAVs that went with me. One was decked out to be an ambulance for casualty triage, and I had another AAV that was literally a walking armory and munitions. So if I had expenditures from my Marines in combat, I could literally resupply them on the spot. So that was my Kilo Mobile concept from Kilo Company. And then I had a Mike 88 Hercules tank retriever that was also part of it. Now we have the upgun weapon systems on the AVs. So I could do flank security. I could do transition triage. I could do resupply if I needed to with munitions. So this is what I was working with at the time. And because I was in a Humvee, my driver and I, Martin Everett, who's since passed away, rest in peace, Martin, I picked him because he was on stop loss, and everyone remembers stop loss. He was supposed to get out of the Marine Corps, and then OIF kicks off, and all the stop loss Marines are going over to deploy with us. And I needed a driver as a company gunny. And, you don't want to pull your gold nuggets that are your squad leaders and team leaders that are going forward who have worked together and they have cohesion. So I grabbed Martin Everett, and Martin Everett had 3 NJPs, and he was ready to get out of the Marine Corps. And I said, that's my guy. I needed somebody that fit the personality I wanted, had an edge to him, and he was my guy. I didn't need perfect. I needed perfect for me, and he was the guy. So he and I had savvy plates issued, but we only had 1 savvy plate given to each of us because we didn't have enough to go around. So we had 1 in the front only. And while we were in our Humvee, we drove like this, facing out, just in case we got attacked from the side. That was a incredible lesson. But the engagements that we had happen to us in OIF-1, it was so quick, so fast, and we were moving. Everyone knows the documented history of that. And then we had the 20-day ceasefire, where we literally, well, it wasn't a ceasefire. We were held in place for 21 days because the combat trains couldn't keep up with the maneuver element. So the assault element moving forward was pretty aggressive, as we moved up, and there were so many skirmishes that we had that took place. So we get to the Diyala Bridge that crosses into Baghdad after months of constant engagements and fighting in different palm groves, and we would hit a palm grove and there would be no enemy. We'd get out of the vehicle. We would do our battle drills through a palm grove, and you would find a fire and a cup of tea that was still boiling. You knew that there was enemy soldiers that were in these fighting positions. But once we came rolling in, they would transition and change into civilian attire and then blend into the population in the town. But then there was another time where we hit a palm grove and we got attacked, and we dismounted and we run through the palm grove. I had Marines injured and wounded during the palm grove, but they took out all the enemy. There was one particular guy, Sergeant Maris, who had an AK-47 round literally hit his handguard on his M16, stuck in the handguard. The handguard splintered and hit him in the face and ripped his face up. But as we moved into the Diyala Bridge going into Baghdad, we set up a blocking position because they had 2 bridges on this river. One was a foot trafficable bridge and one was a vehicle trafficable bridge. And they had destroyed the bridge for vehicles, so we couldn't run our AAVs or tanks or anything across the bridge. The footbridge was the only thing intact, but there were pockets of holes in it. So we had our combat engineers throw planks over so we could run our patrols over that fence line. Now, at this particular time, we're down in a defilade position. We're hunkered down. We got our people on the river, and we're planning our attack to go into Baghdad. And, we watch the vehicles pull up on the other side, and guys in black pajamas get out with AK-47s, RPGs, handheld mortars shooting at us, and we're returning fire. We're sending our patrols over this footbridge. And then we start receiving artillery fire. And a few rounds dropped along the riverbank, but no damage. It was like nearby, but, you learn that they don't have the same precision when they fire their artillery as we put into ours with our forward observers and our fire support teams who do a great job. But one of the artillery rounds lands in our AAV, a vehicle. So the vehicle is behind a wall. You got Marines inside the AAV. You got Marines in a squad laying next to the AAV. They're getting ready to go across the bridge. They've done the rehearsals. They're kind of like in a check down at the moment, just relaxing before they go across the bridge. I had just talked to these Marines, walked around a wall, and this artillery round hits this AAV. Tremendous explosion. I get blown back against the wall. I somersaulted, came up. I see this big hunk of metal and fire and smoke. And then it's like this quiet and in that moment, I'm running through the smoke towards the AAV because I knew I had Marines there. It was just by instinct, right? And then I start hearing screaming because the Marines that were on the side of the vehicle got hit pretty hard with metal and heavy pieces of metal landing and crushing legs and you name it, and eardrums blown out. And so the screaming in combat, death is one thing, but the wounded and the screaming is something that just, will rattle your bones. So I run over to the AV, and the 2 Marines inside, Vilas and Medellin, were both killed. And there were body parts and, all dismembered. I ran into the vehicle and started pulling out munitions with our company first sergeant, and Martin Everett joined me. Everett had been hit in the face. He was bleeding. I grabbed him, wiped his face, make sure he was good. And we got rid of all the munitions that were in danger of exploding because there was a fire inside the AV now. And then to grab a torso of a body and read the name tape of the Marine, and then pick up a decapitated head with the eyes looking at me to match it to the body to put in a body bag was pretty tough, But there was something that still had to be done. I had to remain calm, I had to be efficient. We had to evacuate the wounded, move the deceased to a different area, and then focus on the mission at hand. And I had some people that froze, I had a corpsman who I'd been really tough on with training, really tough on. And I regret that to this day, actually. But at that time, at my age, I was very aggressive on him. I regret it. 2 corpsmen stood up, Doc Snodgrass and a Doc Evans. And I said they were heroes that day. They really helped salvage so much for me at that moment. And then we had Overwatch with snipers up top. Jack Coughlin was up top, and we had our fire support team overwatching us. And then we sent our Marines across the bridge to go into the attack, And then we go across into Baghdad. And we were expecting heavy resistance because we had had different phases of resistance along the way, whether it was the Fedayeen, the early crossing was limited resistance because those were type of soldiers that were really malnourished. They really didn't want to fight. They were giving up a lot. But as we moved into the heart of Iraq and moved up towards Baghdad, the resistance changed. We had people coming in from all these different places, the Ba'ath Party, Fedayeen, you name it. So we get across into Baghdad. And, it's amazing to me how many people I talk to now. It seems like not that long ago for me, but 22, 23 years ago is when this happened. If you weren't alive then or you were really young, you don't remember what it was like when we crossed into Baghdad and how we were looked at as saviors. Everything started to change when we went into Baghdad. We were having people with American flags. How they got the American flags, I don't know, but everyone had an American flag. They're waving, they're cheering us on, they're thanking us because now the regime had been taken down. They would finally have their opportunity to be free, you name it. So we get into the Palestine Square and that area in Baghdad. And the famous video that everyone has seen with the Saddam Hussein statue being taken down was Task Force Tank and Task Force 3-4. That was our battalion that took that down. And I was sent all over the battlefield. I was in that area. I was over here for this. My battalion commander literally, there's been some pictures and some stories that circulated around that time of our battalion commander, BP McCoy, throwing a hand grenade. And he got assaulted in Al Qut. And he taught me a very valuable lesson that I used later in a deployment when I got under fire, where he turned his Humvee towards the enemy, where he put an engine block and a ballistic shield between him and the enemy that was firing at him with small arms and had the machine gunner up top, attack that. Little things like that were gold nuggets. And in the palm grove as we're fighting and I'm dismounted, Colonel McCoy runs up to me and says, "Gunny, do you have any more grenades?" Because he had thrown all his grenades. This is the battalion commander, right? I run to my AAV that has my munitions and I grab grenades and I hand it to him. And I can't make this up. He goes, "I'll pay you back." A few days later, he literally showed up to our pause and delivered me some new hand grenades to put in my inventory because I had to keep track of what we were expending, right? Great man. So now we're back in Baghdad. We get to this Palestine Square. We're securing the area. Now the cheers are starting to fade and we're having people looting banks, looting shops. Chaos is starting to unfold where you have civilians bringing their children and their old parents to find us to get medical attention. So now we have to start putting up concertina wire in civil disturbance type of situations, right? To care for people, have interpreters come in. And this was a significant thing because everything started to change. Like I mentioned earlier, I've never seen so many things change with gear, equipment, optics, different weapons, and then tactics and techniques and procedures were changing daily. So when you try to brief people and you say, this is how we're going to operate, rules of engagement, escalation of force. Even though I told you today, by tomorrow, if you're on a SIPR net and you're getting intel, now you have to change what we were doing the day before. And this is what was going on in Baghdad. So now we're setting up these areas where we have all these civilians influxing in these large crowds, coming to us to find medical attention for their family, you name it. And then guess what starts to spread around? Suicide bombers. Now we're hearing about a suicide bomber hit a crowd over here on this end of the sector, hit somebody over here and killed a Marine, killed a sailor. So now you're thinking differently, right? You're trying to take care of the civilians that are coming to you, large crowd control, but you're fearful that there is going to be someone that gets loose in there and tries to take you out in that way, right? So for most people, whenever you hear veterans that say, I don't like crowds, look, not every veteran experiences this kind of thing, but those that have, there's a reason why they don't like big crowds, because it's kind of hard to get that out of your system when you've been exposed to something like that. So I'm watching this crazy chaos of the crowd. Nothing's working. One of our reservists that was on the tank platoon, who had been a former LAPD cop, was kind of running everything with concertina wire, and the crowd is getting vicious. They're moving forward. They're pushing over the concertina wire. We're not going to shoot in the air. We're not going to shoot our weapons to try to calm them down. We're trying to talk. It's getting ugly. You got people getting stampeded. What do? Gunnery Sergeant Tim Leggett. He was our tank platoon sergeant attached to us. From New Orleans. Great man. Love him to death. Louisiana boy. He comes up to me and he goes, I got an idea. I said, okay. He jumps in his tank and, tankers on the shaft of their cannon have their call sign painted on. His was Blackula, right? Blackula was fantastic. He pulls up in his tank, spins the tank around, revs the engine. If you've never been behind a tank engine, right? It's like a jet engine. This extreme heat and volume comes out. When he did that, that crowd spread like cockroaches running for a drain. And they all went back into their homes, into the buildings, and it was vacant in 2 seconds. I have never witnessed anything like it. It was so powerful that I thought this should have been written in a doctrine to be the way to deal with the crowd. And the best thing about it was when I looked up at the tank and Tim Leggett just took his earmuff off and was like, and I was so proud of that moment. He was fantastic. So we returned after OIF-1, as we call it, back to 29 Palms. And, at the time, there was about a 2 to 3 year period where 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines was the most rapidly deployed unit in the Marine Corps at that particular time. Of course, since then, things changed. But at that particular time, we were. So we come back from OIF-1. We take our standard block leave. People are trying to decompress. We've lost Marines. But we know we are going back. More than likely, but we don't know what for. The insurgency was starting to uprise. So now we go into Bridgeport. We're doing Bridgeport training, all right? Now we go from Bridgeport into the desert. We're doing all of our building blocks again. I'm told that my first sergeant is going to H&S Company, and I have an inbound first sergeant that's going to come for the workups for 1 month before we deploy. Okay, no problem. Standard. I'm still the company gunny. So now I'm experienced and I'm feeling very comfortable and confident in what I've done within this unit now after being forward deployed in combat. So then my sergeant major, Dave Howell, comes up to me and he goes, this weak ass decided to drop his retirement papers when he found out he was going to be coming here and deployed. So I've got another guy coming in and he'll probably get there once we're in theater. I'm like, okay, Sergeant Major. He goes, so you're the fucking first sergeant. I said, hey, this is great for me. So I ended up doing both the company gunny and first sergeant. And it wasn't for ego, which some people might think that was the case, even hearing that. It was more the fact that I didn't want to bring up one of my platoon sergeants to be the company gunny who had a cohesion with their platoon and now building it back and continue it to go into another deployment and combat. I just didn't think that that would be right because I could handle both duties at the time, right? So I did that. But it gave me like a opportunity to look into what we say is a magic crystal ball. Like, I wanted to be a first sergeant, sergeant major. So now I'm acting as it, and I see my life unfolding in front of my eyes. Things started to unravel before we went back to OF2. We were only back in the States for 4 months before we went back. And so during that time, we had Bridgeport, desert training, and now we're going back. But then we get the word that the tactics and techniques and procedures, once again, have changed. Now we're doing what they call STASO, support and stability operations, which means that now, instead of crossing a danger area in combat, you're going to walk across it. You're going to have basketballs, and you're going to hand a basketball to a group of children, and you're going to try to win the hearts and minds. This is the early stages of what became the counterinsurgency coin, right? So it's called SASO. So we are sent to Okinawa, Japan. We go to Okinawa, Japan for 2 months, and we're doing stall training and lane training to get our Marines into a different mindset to get ready to go and to do this in Iraq now. Now, again, the insurgency hasn't exploded yet. We're starting to get grumblings and gravel and all this type of stuff coming back from what's going on over there. Threats were really landmines, so the Humvees were now with sandbags in the bottom of the Humvee so that you were protecting from a landmine blast. And that was all true. So we get to Iraq, and we go up to the Haditha Dam, right, in Haqqaniya, and there's no real big threat there yet, right? And we replaced an Army unit. And that Army unit stayed at the dam and never went into town unless they needed to. So our battalion commander said, we're going to shake the hornet's nest. We're going to start doing patrols and get out there and do all this stuff. So that was what we were doing. But we were still doing the SASO mindset, handing out basketballs and shaking hands and trying to win over the hearts and minds. Then these Blackwater employees are killed in Fallujah, right? And they're hung on a bridge in Fallujah and burned. That word trickles to us. Now, not everyone has access to certain things. So if you're like a certain clearance, you have access to like the SIPRNet with the S2 and you get intel. And I'm being told that we're leaving tonight from the Haditha Dam. Now we're literally locked into where we're operating out of this dam. So I'm thinking, there's no way we're leaving tonight. Ask anyone that was involved in this. We were told to get up and pack up everything and we're leaving. We're on the road. We're moving. So that was a nightmare, but we did it, right? We left a lot of things behind, right, for the next unit to come and take over. So we get in this convoy and we start barreling to Fallujah from Haditha. Now remember, we're doing SASO. We're walking through danger areas, waving and shaking hands. I'll never forget this. I'm in a hardback Humvee now. I got sandbags on the floor for landmines. I've got a gun turret and a machine gunner in the turret, and he's got no protection. He's just sitting up on a strap with his machine gun. As we start rolling into Fallujah, I see all these vehicles coming out of Fallujah, and they have these casings built around the turret. And I see the gunner, all I see is a hand above it holding the butterfly trigger of their machine gun because they're hunkered down. So I'm thinking, what in the hell is going on? Something has to be wrong here. So we start getting the word that there are a lot of small arms fire and RPGs that are going to be coming after you. So now I've got Marines that were seasoned going into Baghdad in OIF-1. And 4 months after coming back, we're there doing this now. And I've also got new Marines that did not experience OIF-1. What they've been exposed to is being taught how to do the support and stability operations. Now we go into Fallujah, we get a call on the way in that there's a disturbance. We pull up to cordon off the area. And as we're cordoning off the area, we start seeing artillery and mortar rounds walking in on our paws. Like they literally trapped us, started bringing the rounds into our paws. We get out of that. We go into Fallujah, and our battalion commander literally was aggressive. He said, we are going to be a thunder run. We are going to shake the hornet's nest once again. And this is what the mission is calling for us to do. Now, this is in April of 2004, Vigilant Resolve, right? This is before the November 2004 push. So there were less units going in. And then we were stopped midway through the city and held a ceasefire. Now, while we lived in the city during that ceasefire, we were constantly getting harassed at night, constantly, right? because they knew we weren't able to do much other than maybe return fire, and that's about it, just to kind of get out of the situation. But as we go into Fallujah for this attack, we get into this area with these buildings. And one building, which we found out later was well fortified, they had underground tunnels. We kept sending a squad to go into this building, and we couldn't make it in. Every time we went into the building, we'd send a satchel charge, a small rocket, hand grenades, and we think we've killed anything that's inside, now we'll go in and clear it. Every time we received the same return fire. So whatever we were using wasn't working. I even had a young Marine, Lance Corporal Will Hoyt, and to this day, the guy probably should have had a Navy Cross. And that's a disparity that, with award systems, it's frustrating for a lot of us. You see the right people get awards and the right people get accolades, but there's a lot of times where those things just don't happen, right? Or you regret that it should have been something more later. Hoyt put himself in positions as the Lance Corporal on top of that building, trying to just insert different types of rounds to allow our squad to go in. So we finally go into this building, and Corporal Daniel Amaya was a squad leader, and they're getting ready to go into this room, and he's got a short stack to go in, and he has Lance Corporal Walt Schellebarger getting ready to go in, and his flashlight is not working on his rifle. So he's the whatever number he was in the stack, Corporal Amaya said, "Hey, we're going to switch positions because my weapon has a flashlight that works. You know the role. You know what you're supposed to do. Let's switch." He switches. When they go in, Corporal Amaya is the first one in the room, and Schellebarger is in plain sight of an enemy fortified on the top of a ladder well. And Amaya sees it as Schellebarger is in the line of sight. And Amaya puts himself in front of the blast of the AK-47. And he's hit. He's got sappy plates, but he gets hit in the neck and just below the abdomen. I'm right behind the wall, so I come in to do the transition casualty. So I grabbed Corporal Amaya, and we put him in a vehicle, and we evac him out of there for transition triage. I could see in his eyes he was deceased. I knew it. I'll never forget seeing him in that moment. But you can't share that because we want to have hope that maybe they can bring some life back into him. So we triage him, and he gets evacuated. And of course we continue on. And later, after some of the engagements that happened through that day, by the way we took the building down was we brought in a D9 bulldozer and tore down the whole complex, which I don't know why we didn't do that in the first place, because that was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. We'd have saved some lives. And as Corporal Daniel Amaya was killed, we had a few other unfortunate situations within our battalion in Fallujah, and we lost a few Marines at the same time, so the word started spreading. And then Corporal Jason Dunham, who is now in 3-7, had been mortally wounded on the Syrian border, and that got to us around the same time. This was Easter Sunday in 2004. And Jason Dunham used to be with 3-4 for a short period. He was with our company. So Corporal Daniel Amaya was pronounced dead, and we shared that, and it was a mourning process. But so many years later, so many Marines in his squad have named their children Amaya. I mean, you've got Victor Garcia and Walt Schellebarger, and there's guys like Doug Osborne and Dusty Ladendorf. So many Marines that just looked up to this young man. He grew up in Odessa, Texas, where the Friday Night Lights actually took place in that school. That's where he went to school. He's buried in El Paso at Fort Bliss. We always do our best to recognize Corporal Daniel Amaya and so many others who pay the ultimate sacrifice, for us. Now, a quick Jason Dunham story, right? So Jason Dunham was born on November 10th, Marine Corps birthday, right? He's in Kings Bay, Georgia. After Kings Bay, Georgia, he gets sent to 29 Palms. He's in 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. It's right after we had returned from OIF 1. So we're in the transition of gearing back up to go for OIF 2, right? Which eventually became Fallujah. Jason Dunham had made the decision that he was getting out of the Marine Corps. So because of his time being short with us, we sent him to 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, right? And then he eventually came over and told us that I realized that I need to extend and go to Iraq with these Marines. They need leadership, and I want to be the one that leads them into battle. You know, this is something that is very noteworthy, right? But before he left 3-4, the guy was a stud. And, you know, a lot of times when someone has deceased and passed, we like to tell a lot of great stories about them. And sometimes we wonder if they knew this about themselves and how people saw them. And Dunham did, because I always would tell these stories about Dunham. Company gunning, me, I take my company NCOs out every 2 weeks to do physical training with the company gunny. Now, I know what everyone's thinking when they hear that. Here we go again, another gunny or a sergeant major taking a death run with all his Marines and all that stuff. No. Before, you know, functional fitness and combat conditioning became real popular, we were doing that already in our battalion. So what I would do is I would take my NCOs and we would literally go and do our own combat conditioning and functional fitness, and I would show them how to operate and logistically set this up in small areas. I was really big on this, and I wanted to show them that so that they could take it and do it with their squads. Because the last thing we wanted in the infantry, going back into combat, was having basketball for PT. No, you're a combat athlete. You need to condition and train yourself for the rigors of what we are going to be exposed in, whether it's hip movements, it's functional fitness, it's combat range of motion, you name it. So at the end of this event, I bring all the NCOs to a gymnasium with a dip bar, and this is how I ended it. And this is a little arrogant on my part. I get on the dip bar and I said, I'm going to knock out a max set of dips, and whatever I accomplish is going to be your goal, to all my corporals and sergeants. Now, at this particular time, I knew nobody's going to keep up with me in dips. You know, I was in really good shape, really confident. I jump up on this pull-up or dip bar. I knock out 49 dips. That's right, 49. That's not a typo or a mistake. And so what I told them is that now you get on the bar, and if you only accomplish 10, you get off, you get back in line, and when you come back, you start at 11, and you keep going until you hit 49, right? No one is even coming close to me. And I'm kind of like, hey, this is all right. Jason Dunham gets on the dip bar in front of all my NCOs. The guy's a stud, man. Knocks out easily, gets to 49 or 48. Gets to 48, stops, looks at me. 49, easily. Goes down to 50, and goes, "Arrah," and jumps off the dip bar. All the NCOs go, hysterical crazy. He got me. You know, the guy got me. And there were so many other stories like that. I had a chance to meet his family, talk to his mother, his father, his sister, and tell them so many wonderful stories that I had, you know, with Jason. If you don't know who Corporal Jason Dunham is, Jason Dunham was the first Marine to be awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously after Vietnam. On the Syrian border while serving with 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, there were an entry control point, and they got into a fight with some Iraqi gentlemen that were disguised and trying to hide and take them out. And one of them pulled out a grenade to take out the Marines. And without hesitation, Jason Dunham jumped on the grenade, took the blast with his helmet on his chest. And he was mortally wounded. You know, we heard about it while we were in Fallujah. And, you know, he passed later on. But that hit us really hard because there were so many Marines at that time with us and with him that were all killed in action or mortally wounded and eventually passed. A very tough time. In April 2004, Operation Vigilant Resolve, as we go into Fallujah and we're fighting, we're engaging the enemy, we are told to stop in place. There's a ceasefire that comes from Washington, D.C. So we're in place and we're getting harassed at night. We're returning fire, but we're not assaulting through it. You know, there's a big difference in that. You know, you can be on a convoy and eat an IED on your convoy, return fire and escape. But for our battle drills in the infantry, you dismount and assault through the ambush, right? And take out the aggressor. So we're upset because now we're stuck in Fallujah and we can't do anything. So we're all pissed off. You know, Marines are asking, what's going on? Why can't we do this? We're getting pop shots and we're being told we can't do anything. General James Mattis was the 1st Marine Division commanding general. And the Blue Diamond was getting poos, the point of origin of enemy fire that was coming from a place outside of Fallujah called Karma. And that's where they believe a lot of the insurgents were fleeing to in Fallujah. Whenever we were attacking, they were fleeing to Karma. So now he takes our company and 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, Kilo Company with some Army attachments, ODA, and some PSYOPs. And we go into Karma, to take out the bad guys. The morning we pulled into Karma, we know that this is where they're all hiding and getting away from us so that they can escape in Karma. So we're driving into the town and we're hitting our first objective. It's early in the morning and a vehicle comes around the corner and an LAV shoots the vehicle and it explodes in fireballs. And in a 7-ton, our driver had his NVGs on because we're driving in complete blackout. He gets blinded and he thinks he's driving on the road and he turns off the bridge into the Tigris River. And the vehicle turns over and all the Marines in the back go into the river with all their gear and equipment. But the vehicle gets stuck by its axle on the bridge so it doesn't fall on top of them. But I'm in a Humvee up front and I hear the chaos on the radio. It's early in the morning. I get out, I sprint back like 500 meters. And as I get there, Lieutenant Stokes is the platoon commander. He's already in the water doing recovery ops. Staff Sergeant Hayes is the platoon sergeant. He's doing recovery ops. And all this is going on. And all of a sudden, as this happens, RPGs and small arms start coming at us, right? They start attacking us at this point. Sergeant Major Dave Howell was our sergeant major. It was like a movie scene. I'm over here trying to stay away from like enemy observation in the middle of the morning. And he's walking down the street. And I look up and I see him. He goes, "What the fuck is going on, Courville?" And I'm like, "Sergeant Major." And before I could finish that sentence, a few rounds hit by our feet. And we hit the deck and we roll out of the way. And then we carry on into our first objective. And then, the call to prayer comes over. And after the call to prayer comes on, there's a silence, almost like they stop for prayer, right? Then after prayer goes on, the Army PSYOPs crank up AC/DC's Hell's Bells. Man, nothing like it. It was like going into the gym with headphones on. I mean, it changed the whole dynamic of what we were about to do. We all started calling it bad karma after this. But while we were in this fight, I had a lot of Marines wounded. And, I was doing medevac drills. I had, medevac procedures. I walk up to one area and Corporal Dean Sanchez is sitting there with his arm bandaged up. He got shot through the shoulder. Him and another guy named Sarabia, but he got shot through the shoulder. And I said, "Sanchez, let's go. I'm a medevac you so you can get treated." He goes, "I'm not going anywhere, Gunny." You got to love that. He said, "I'm not going anywhere." And I respected that, right? As this is going on, I got to tell you, Dean Sanchez, I have to share the story because this guy is something else. He was one of those Marines that just makes me laugh with so many stories. So that's one story with the shoulder. When I first met him, I checked in the 3-4 the company gunny. I'm in service alphas with a coffee cup walking in the hallway. I just got there. It was like a scene out of Heartbreak Ridge with Gunny Highway, walking in his office. And I see him with another Marine in PT gear standing outside the first sergeant's office. And I go, "What are you two doing here?" He said, "We're here to see the first sergeant." I was like, "What happened?" And the other guy had like a black eye. Sanchez got pissed off at this guy named Lance Corporal Riggs during a PT session and beat him with a helmet. Right? So that's my first encounter with Sanchez. Now we're in Fallujah and we're doing patrols out at night. And this might have been OF1. Actually, I can't remember now. That kind of goes back and forth. We're doing patrols. Sanchez and his squad find an IED. And the way you dealt with an IED is you cordon off the area and you call in EOD. And you have to wait for EOD to come in, solve the problem. Well, Sanchez low crawls up to the IED like he's Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, like literally the green, yellow, and blue wire type of thing, and cuts it and diffuses it. And it goes in our favor, but you have to report that up when you have an IED. Like, what was the report? Once that gets to like the battalion higher, all hell broke loose. And of course, the platoon commander got his ass destroyed for letting this happen. I was in the COC. We're hearing this. I'm giggling and I'm thinking, what the fuck, Sanchez? So now I've got Sanchez in Karma. He gets shot through the shoulder. He's like, I'm not going anywhere, Gunny. Hey, I got it, man. I respect that. Now, as we're fighting, this is an embarrassing story for me. We have jets coming in, and they can't find the target they need to hit for us in a building. So I have somebody yell at me that I've got violet smoke for my 203 grenade launcher. So I need to launch the 203 violet smoke onto the target, right? So I run up this hill next to this building, kind of fully expose myself. And I shoot 3 rounds to try to hit this building so the jets can see it. I missed it every time. Hit the wrong building, and they had to wave off. That was not good, I'll tell you that. But we ended up hitting the target and taking care of it. And then we had smoke coming through, and you couldn't see, but the small arms were coming through the smoke. And I had a Marine in a machine gun turret named Michael Beckwith, and he pulled up the NVGs for looking through thermal. And he literally looked with the thermal sights and could see through the smoke. And he started directing Marines onto the enemy through the smoke with his thermal. This was during the day, because now the sun is up. I mean, it was just like the ingenuity and the idea for a young Marine like to go, you know what, we can't see, but let me try these thermal sights and see if they work. You know, those are the things that just make you proud. And I'll tell you, with that battalion and that company, and every Marine or soldier, sailor, like I mentioned earlier, not everyone has been in a great unit. You've been in good units, right? The circa from 2003 to 2005, Kilo 3-4, just that unit. And whatever unit you were in, you could probably use the same litmus test as a blueprint. If you took that unit and put them in any profession as a unit, no matter where it was, corporate, private, etc., and you gave them 90 days to learn the positions you put them in, and then let them operate, they would be so successful. And I'll tell you what it is. It's cohesion. You cannot teach cohesion. The fact that these people, these Marines, these men served in adversity, experienced ugly behaviors with the world, were together through all the ups and downs and thick and thin, that is something you cannot teach. So if you could take that cohesion of that unit and put them into any profession, blueprint for success right there. You know, awards are a contentious conversation with a lot of veterans, because you have people that rightfully deserve awards, and you have questionable awards that are given out. And so a lot of times, you know, you try to become humble. And I think we've all learned that the loudest people in the room that talk about their deployments, their combat experiences, are usually the ones that probably didn't experience the things they're talking about. They're, you know, it's uncomfortable to say that out loud, because there are veterans that will get upset when they hear that, you know, but you can't believe every story. You know, we've seen that. There's stolen valor. There's all that type of thing. Stolen valor is frustrating. I've seen it. It doesn't frustrate me as much as it does to see a veteran that I know didn't experience what they're bragging about. That upsets me more than stolen valor, right? So I'm proud to say that I have a Navy Commendation Medal and a Bronze Star, both with a V, as a gunnery sergeant. And they were impact awards, meaning they weren't for the deployment. They were for one specific event, all right? The Navy Commendation was the mass casualty drills that took place on the Diyala Bridge in Baghdad for OIF-1. And the Bronze Star with the Combat V was for actions in Karma. There were a lot of things that were taking place during that time where I was on the radio coordinating tanks coming in. I missed the target with the 203 rounds onto a building. The medevac procedures, engaging the enemy, moving from point A to point B under fire. There was a lot of things that took place with that. And, you know, fortunately, my battalion commander and company commander, you know, witnessed this and submitted me for that award. And I'm very humble about it, because there were so many things that were happening that day. And like I said, the credit that goes along with so many of those Marines that fought that day, and the cohesion of the family brethren that we had was incredibly important. And, you know, we ran into a very unique, what I would say would be a case study now in Fallujah during that time. We were getting ready to go into Fallujah, right, knowing it's going to be ugly. And we're preparing that night. And my company commander at the time the sexiest name in the world, right? I always would tell this guy, you could be a rock star, a porn star, or a famous actor. Morgan Savage was his name, right? And we're sitting at night kind of going over the rehearsals about leaving in the morning, crossing the line of departure. And we received rounds over this fence line. We were in this compound before we went into Fallujah. We were outside of Fallujah. And these rounds come in and everybody hits the deck. And come to find out it was friendly fire. But we all hit the deck. But when he hit the deck, he landed on a GP tent stake, those big stakes, and it punctured his thigh. Now, we didn't know this. He didn't say anything. So the next morning, we get up and we're having our final, discussion before we load up the vehicles and get ready to go into Fallujah, full-blown thunder run. And I see blood on his pants leg. I go, "Are you okay?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm fine. I landed on a tent stake. I'll check it in a minute." So after everything's done, I get up to go and stage all the vehicles. I might have had 75 vehicles in a serial. Ridiculous. And when I said in high school, I don't need to use math, I was wrong, because every note card with EDL numbers of how many, rifles and 203s and bayonets and K-bars and gas mask and all of that, I had to keep track of all that. And a note card in a trash bag to keep from getting wet. I'm doing that. As I'm doing that, the company commander stands up, drops his trousers for the doc to look at his wound. And he had punctured his leg so bad that his thigh was opened up where you could see his bone and his flesh was hanging out. And this is what I'm told, they said when he saw that, he passed out. All right. We're literally loading the vehicles to go into war. Battalion commander made a decision. They grabbed the H&S company commander from who had served in OIF-1 with India Company, Tim Walker. He walks over literally and goes, "Gents, I'm the company commander. Give me a brief on what we're doing." Literally. I mean, it's a case study. It's like the stuff you read about where someone goes down, next man up, they bring in somebody like Tim Walker, and he's our company commander through this. And I felt horrible for Captain Savage because now as he's healing and he's in the hospital unit, his Marines that were killed in action, like Corporal Daniel Amaya, are being brought in from the battle and laying next to him while he's recovering from that wound. You can imagine the psychological effect that happened. And then he's the battle captain while we're in the fight because he's wounded. He can't move with his lower body. And he's getting casualty reports of Marines that are his company. And he's not with us. Devastating. The psychological effects. We talk about a lot of things with death but the suicide rate that takes place, we've exceeded casualties now. And we're not the only battalion in suicides post-war that we received in combat. The wounds you can't see. And you never know what someone's going through. I mean, we hear that all the time. So I become a first sergeant and I get sent to Parris Island, South Carolina. And that is probably my second best job and duty station as a first sergeant. I was able to be a first sergeant in a training company and then ultimately going to drill instructor school over a 3-year period. And there's so many stories that you hear about being a drill instructor and a recruit, but being a first sergeant, your entertainment comes from the drill instructors more than the recruits. And it's a great opportunity to be in a structured environment like that for leadership and mentorship. And drill instructors, and I was one too, where you get blinded by the mission. I mean, you are focused on what you have. And that's actually something to applaud, as opposed to discourage. But you have people in positions like a first sergeant that always remind them that, look, there's a bigger Marine Corps out there that you're going to still be part of. So we need to make sure that you're still set up for whether you go to your PME school and all that type of thing. But a funny story at Parris Island, I was at my company, and the way it worked at Parris Island is, and unlike San Diego on the West Coast, in San Diego, you have lead series and trail series, they call it. Parris Island, they call it lead and follow. And at San Diego, lead series can do PT in the morning and trail or follow can do it in the afternoon because the weather's convenient. Parris Island, the whole company, both series have to do it in the morning. Otherwise, you're going to have a black flag. You won't be able to train. So the beautiful thing about that is that I would go out with our company and do PT with them. And then after PT was over, they would get dressed and head to like an academics classroom. And during that period, I knew that I could go either finish my workout, go to the gym, go for an extra run, and then get changed, cleaned up. And then the rest of the day, I was engaged in whatever duties I had. So this one particular day, I decided to go on a run of the back loop, we call it at Parris Island. And as I'm running this back loop, you have the physical conditioning platoon, right? These are recruits that ship to boot camp. They can't pass their initial strength test. So they're put into a physical conditioning platoon to kind of get stronger so that they can pass their IST and then get into training. So when you say recruit training is only 12 weeks, there are some that go longer because they're in PCP, right? For a long time. While they're running their exit PFT, we call it, PCP is running now. They have the medical rehabilitation platoon recruits that are in crutches and broken legs and all of that at checkpoints to where when the recruits run by, this is the half-mile turnaround, right? So as I'm running this loop, I start running towards this recruit that I can see maybe 50 meters in front of me, sitting on a stool with a crutch and a cast. And he's got a sign that says, half-mile turnaround or PFT turnaround. And as I'm running to him, I'm a first sergeant, right? I'm wearing silkies. Imagine this, right? I'm wearing silkies, this tight blue shirt. I'm in great shape. I got this flat top and I'm running towards him and I'm thinking, I'm going to wear him out. I can tell already he's not going to stand up and say, "Good morning, sir," right? Because he's got a cast. I knew it. I said, he's going to do that. So as I'm running towards him, that recruit's like this, right? And as I get closer to the distance, this snake comes crawling out of the tree line between me and that recruit across my path. I screamed and jumped in the air like, "Ah!" And I lost all cool points. And when I landed, I tried to hurry up and get away. And as I got to that recruit, the recruit had the sign and he just went like this. He goes, "Good morning, sir." Didn't stand up. I just go, "Good morning." And I kept running. Oh my God. Thank God there were no like cameras or phones around. I mean, it was one of those moments that I giggle about, to this day. As badass as you think you are, as tough as you think you are, we all have an Achilles tendon, and that surely was mine in that moment, man. It was absolutely, absolutely hilarious. When I was promoted to sergeant major, and the way the Marine Corps operates, you have your MAGTF concept, right? I grew up in the ground combat element, infantry. So the Marine Corps gives me orders to an F-18 fighter attack squadron, right? In Miramar. And I'm thrilled, right? It's something new for me. And I check into this unit, great Marines. And I was a little bit worried at first because, you always hear the horror stories in your career that the air wing is different. The master sergeants aren't going to listen to the sergeant major because the sergeant major tries to act like a drill instructor or infantry and it's not the infantry. And you hear all these stories. And you don't have first sergeants. It's just a sergeant major and master sergeants. But this particular squadron is what they call a boat squadron. So at the time, I'm sure it's still the same. You have one squadron on the West Coast, one on the East that goes with a Navy CAG when they deploy. And so that unit as a boat squadron rates a master gunnery sergeant as their maintenance chief. So I know this and I'm thinking, oh man, I want to make sure after I check in with the commanding officer, I want to introduce myself to the master guns. I knew he had 26 years in. I didn't know his name. I was told 26 years. I had 20 at the time. And that's a big difference when you're at that level. You think it's not when you hear it now, but that's a big difference, and he grew up in the aviation community. Other than recruiting duty, one tour, he's been in aviation as a maintenance chief, so he knows what he's doing. I walk into his office, and when I turn the corner, it was a master guns that I had been to the gunnery sergeant's advanced course when we were both gunnery sergeants, and we were friends. But we hadn't kept in touch because it wasn't cell phones like we have now. And, that was a phenomenal experience because he and I had a wonderful rapport. I will tell you on that deployment, because we went on the USS Ronald Reagan, Operation Tomodachi broke out. And what happened in 2011 is Japan was hit with these earthquakes and one of their nuclear reactor facilities kind of crashed. And there was like radiation in the air and it was devastation everywhere. So we divert to Japan to help with recovery and humanitarian options. Now, we're on a carrier, but we're not able to like send Marines off the ship. We had helicopters going out. So we were on ship for 76 days without hitting land. And only certain people were allowed on the flight deck because of the radiation threat. I was one of the people that was allowed to go up there as a sergeant major. And I'll tell you, with all the things that I've seen in combat, with death in other places I've been stationed, I have never been more emotional than what I saw that day when I got to the flight deck. When you looked into the sea, the whole sea was literally no water. The top was filled with houses that were off the foundation, floating in the water, families dead, holding hands still face down in the water, missing legs, bodies floating in the water, and the ship is just going through it. You're sitting there looking at this. It's just like, my God, man, this is awful. And then you see a face, even from a distance, that looking up at you, floating in the water, teddy bear with a girl. I mean, all these things are just very, very ugly. And after we did that, we are diverted to Afghanistan to do combat operations in support of Afghanistan. And so we have F-18s. And I have to give a shout out to the aviation community, because we always talk about special operators and infantry and hardcore. I'll tell you what, I have a huge respect for naval aviators. So the Navy and Marine Corps, as we know, at the time had F-18 Hornets. The Navy squadron would have two-seaters. So they had a pilot and a Wizzo. The Marine seats that we had was a one-seated F-18. So they did it all as a pilot by themselves. So, there's some shit talking already just from that. But watching these men land that F-18 at night on an aircraft carrier in rough seas with no lights on, listening to the platform on the ship, talking to them and their instruments, and landing that on it's a little aircraft carrier from their perspective when they're coming down. And if you don't know, when they hit that platform, they're at full throttle and they have a tail hook that catches that wire. If you miss the wire, you're at full throttle so you can take off and come back around for another attempt. You're given 2 attempts. If you don't make it on the second attempt, you're diverted to the nearest land base so you don't run out of fuel. And that happened one time where a pilot didn't see us again for 3 weeks. Literally, he's like partying in Spain while we're out there doing this. So I have a whole new perspective of respect for naval aviators. And they have so many hours they have to sleep before they can go on another mission. So they're on Ambien. They're wired when they come in. They can't. I mean, they're just jacked. But I tell you that because I'm in the ready room, which is equivalent to a combat operations center on the ship. And we're sending jets into Afghanistan. And we had a troops in contact report. And I'm a sergeant major in the F-18 squadron in the ready room at night. And I'm listening to the radio as our pilots fly in to drop bombs. And they were supporting 3-4 on the ground. My unit that I had served in combat with as a gunny and an infantryman is now in Afghanistan. And my F-18 squadron, which I had nothing to do with any of this, I'm just the sergeant major. But the fact that it was like this circle of just satisfaction, knowing that these troops are getting supported by F-18s from the unit I'm now the sergeant major, right, was fantastic. Now, I'm on top of the world. I've got 20 years in. I've done all these wonderful things in my career. I'm on a rocket ship to stardom. I mean, literally, in so many ways. I made a horrible choice in my life, and I've made many. And there's a difference between a choice and a mistake. And this was a choice. I was talking to a married woman who was married to a Marine before we deployed. And I was found out and turned in by her husband. And they investigated me. And it was all phone calls. So I was told to back off. And I was given what they call a no contact report. And if they messaged me, email, phone call, anything, we're at sea at ship, so it wasn't easy to get hold. It was really an email would be the only way, that I had to report it to my commanding officer immediately. And that was embarrassing enough that this was already happening, you know? And I'm married at the time. Well, she emailed me while I was on ship and I responded. And her husband found out, turned me in. Now, I shot myself in the foot, self-sabotaged my career, literally. I had been at 20 years at the point. I knew I wanted to go another 10, maybe to 30. We were on our way back home from the deployment on ship. I got told I was relieved, put on a flight, jolted off the ship, and sent back to Miramar for an investigation. And I violated the no contact order, and I was given NJP. Now, there was obviously more to it than, phone calls. And, I hold myself accountable until I saw, well, not until, I hold myself accountable because I didn't think I hurt anyone because no one knew until I saw the betrayal in my ex-wife's eyes when she found out and I had to tell her what happened. That was a huge turning point for me. And since then, because it's been like 16 years, I've often said, I realized it happened for me and not to me, but I can't egotistically say it that way because I ruined a lot of things. I hurt my children, I hurt my ex-wife, I hurt family, I hurt their family. It was a ripple effect in the water, Now, this gentleman that turned me in, I knew that he had his own issues with doing things he shouldn't have been doing. But I knew I wasn't the kind of person that said, well, he's doing it too. I wasn't going to be that person. And he had his own trials and tribulations following that. And since then, I spoke to him on the phone a few years back and I forgave him. And he forgave me and we moved on. But it affected so many lives and it ended what I thought was going to be a promising 10 more years in the Marine Corps. So I had 2 years left on my contract, right? And at that time, even though I was retirement eligible, I didn't submit for retirement. I said, I'm going to finish out these 2 years. So after the investigation's over, I get sent to a MALS unit, Marine Aviation Logistics Squadron, to finish out my 2 years. MALS 16, the Forerunners. I get in my service alphas. I go to the colonel that's in charge of the MAG, the group, and he says, I don't want you anywhere near my Marines. But the commanding general says, I have to put you in the MALS, but I don't want you here. I have never been told that in my career. I usually walk into a room chest out. I walked out of there with my chest down. I felt deflated, defeated. I was like, is this even worth trying to do 2 more years? Knowing that I have a scarlet letter on my uniform. So I report to the Lieutenant Colonel, Thomas Lenhart, in MAL 16. Now, I say this as a compliment. He didn't look like a Marine. He had been enlisted, and he worked on CH-46s. Went to the Naval Academy, got his commission. He kind of looked like a Peabody professor, as we used to say, right? Sleeves all puffy, hair like this, nice, soft, quiet, Christian man, never used profanity. And when I reported in and I was talking to him, I said, sir, if you want me to tell you what happened with the investigation or any rumors about me, I'm glad to be able to share with you what happened. And I'll never forget this. He said, Sergeant Major, I heard some things. I read your bio, and I am so thankful to have you as my right-hand man. Welcome aboard. It meant the world to me. And he could not have been more opposite than every commander I'd ever served because he didn't have an ego. He wasn't an alpha male. He was smart. He relied on his people. He was just a softer presence. And that changed so many things. And the reason I share this is the Marines in MAL 16 saved my life. If I would have gotten out of the Marine Corps right then, I would have been one of the 22 cases. No doubt about it. The toughest men and women, usually men though, that I have ever met are the ones that end up committing suicide. We're all susceptible to a bad day, right? Especially with that trauma. But those Marines gave me purpose. I knew I wasn't going to stay in after 2 years. So my focus was just on those Marines, right? And how I dealt with things in the unit. And they saved me. They were a great, opportunity for me to get re-inspired, to find out who I was. Because now I'm a single sergeant major, knowing I'm getting out of the Marine Corps. I could have easily said, hey, I'm just going to work on my retirement plans and get out. So in MAL 16, I had a great opportunity present itself, and it was by accident. I'm a sergeant major, and I'm taking every Friday a group of NCOs, staff NCOs, all by rank, to PT, conditioning with the sergeant major. So on this Friday, I would take 2 corporals from every department. And a department in a MALS is about the size of a company in a battalion. So 2 corporals coming from one department, like the maintenance department, isn't going to make a dent in what they do that day. Nobody's going to miss that. So I would take 2 corporals on these Fridays from each department, then 2 sergeants the next week, 2 staff sergeants a week after that, and even gunnery sergeants. And again, when you hear that, no, I wasn't taking them on death runs. I was taking them to show them how to do physical training with their Marines in a small space. The things I learned on ship, the things I learned personally, how I trained myself in Iraq, what could be Marine Corps centric, right? So at the end of these sessions, I would do a conversation. I would sit them all around and I would teach them something and have a guided discussion, or I would have questions and answers, anything they wanted, an education of a moment. I told them about mule packing that we did at Bridgeport. I just happened to mention the comment in a story, right? Because it came after some event that took place that everyone was talking about on TV. And I said, yeah, we do mule packing in the Marine Corps. And they all laughed at me. They thought I was messing with them. Now, these are corporals in the aviation community. I was like, we do that in Bridgeport, mountain warfare training. They're like, no, Sergeant Major. So my head started to spin, and I thought, what can I do to educate some Marines on this? Because they never were exposed to this. I never even thought about that, even being in the Marine Corps 20 years. So I called up to Bridgeport, and ironically, the Sergeant Major at the time had been my first sergeant when I was a gunny in the first invasion of Iraq. And I said, here's an idea. Tell me if you can do it. If I get a group of Marines and make our way logistically to Bridgeport for 3 days, and you've got an infantry battalion there now, can you tag us in for 3 days to help and allow our Marines to train and get an experience? He said, yeah, I'll talk to the colonel. I'll let you know, which he did. And if you get him up here, we'll take care of it. And I thought, man, what a great idea. So I put this together with my commanding officer. He loved the idea. And we ended up having 22 Marines that wanted to go, right? From Lance Corporal up to Staff Sergeant. None of the gunnery sergeants wanted to go. I never understood that, but they didn't want to go. But I did take the squadron gunnery sergeant. So we had 22 that were identified to go. And I was going to get buses, so I submitted a request to the S4. The same colonel that didn't want me in his unit, this is 2 years later, I won him over. He thought completely different of me. But I give him all the respect in the world. His name was Colonel Gramuglia. I give him all the respect in the world because he said, even though I know what kind of Marine you are and you have won me over, I cannot recommend you for reenlistment because you aren't allowed to reenlist now. So I respected that. And not that I was asking for it, but I'm like, okay. He loved the idea so much, he pulled me in his office. He said, this is one of the best ideas I've ever seen. I'll tell you why. From me, I want to get our Ospreys, which we had just started transitioning 53s into Ospreys, or 46s into Ospreys. He's like, I want to get more training with Bridgeport in the higher altitude with our Ospreys before we go to Afghanistan. So he said, here's what we're going to do. I trashed the bus request. I'm going to fly you and your Marines up in 2 Ospreys. So not only did I get it approved, they loaded us up from Miramar and flew us to Bridgeport in Ospreys. And we did 3 days of training, and the Marines had a blast. Mule packing, horseback, stream crossing, everything that's summer package in mountain warfare. And then the Ospreys came and picked us up and brought us back to Miramar. And that is one of the most prideful memories I have at the end of my tenure, because I felt like I was giving, even though it was only 22 Marines, they started talking about it. And I've kept in touch with so many that are still in the Marine Corps now that tell that story. I mean, a young corporal that was with me that long ago is now, a senior enlisted master sergeant, and they're telling stories about mule packing courses that they got a chance to witness and experience. It was just a, beautiful opportunity. So I retired in 2013 as a sergeant major with 22 years of service. And I found myself in a situation where I was the guy that I used to kind of laugh about 15 years earlier in my career, where I would hear someone retired and they were divorced or going through a divorce, right? I'm like, after all that time, now you get divorced? Well, here I was, retired, 22 years, and I'm divorced. I no longer have my family together with my children, and I'm not active duty anymore, right? And I had a great opportunity that was presented to me to work as a civilian contractor in the Middle East. And I basically did that for almost a decade. And that gave me an opportunity where I was still in a military environment. I was actually doing things that were associated with tactics and weapons engagement, even punishment of soldiers, training, and Arabic and English, and having a team, and, rotating 80 soldiers from a 20-week course to graduation, to starting all over again, to doing everything that we did in the Marine Corps. Physical training, calling cadence in Arabic. I mean, it was a unique opportunity because I was around people that were still my tribe, former military. So we had other Marines, we had soldiers from the Army, we had people from South Africa, New Zealand, England. So there was a conglomerate of so many different people that worked in this contracting company while I was overseas. But it gave me a beautiful opportunity because on the day I retired from active duty, I've always been good about hearing a phrase or coming up with a phrase that gives me almost like a commander's intent. This is how I'm going to live. And that's the choice that's beautiful here, is that I always have made choices in a good way, I should say, that are phrased on something I can operate off of. And here's what I said on my day of retirement. I said, today ends my time on active duty, but not my time being active. And I've been retired 13 years as we're doing this right now. And I have lived my life that way of being active, travel and adventure. So I have this job and I'm working overseas in the Middle East and I'm on my own. And I had to completely rebrand myself. And I knew that I was going to seize opportunities. So, I've traveled to over 51 countries at this point, 10 of those 51 multiple times. When I say travel, I don't mean a resort. I don't mean a layover. I mean investing and immersing myself in places. I've loved hiking and camping. I've loved adventure. I've done Mount Kilimanjaro. I've hiked the Swiss Alps, the French Alps. I've been in so many wonderful opportunities hiking through Europe and Africa and Tanzania. And this is all on my own as a civilian. And the beautiful thing was, as much as I love the military, there's so many safety considerations in the military about what you do, having a battle buddy and, what's your plan and all that stuff. I changed my way of thinking when I retired. Instead of saying be safe, I want people to say have fun. So you commonly would hear be safe, do you have a plan? To me, that's implied now as an adult. Tell me to have fun. All that be safe stuff is implied. But I want adventure. I want to go back and experience things like hiking through Oman and going into villages in Oman, going into Spain and going over to the Swiss Alps and, doing Mount Kilimanjaro was just a wonderful thing. Then I started taking people with me and leading some hikes in different areas and some adventures that I would do. Now, this is all on my off time, right? Because I still had a job that I was doing. And like I said, we were very involved with military. And I'll tell you, there was one very unique story. I have to be very careful how I say this, just because there are certain people that I never want to implicate is not the right word, but I'm being considerate of people that are still doing some of these jobs over there. There was one particular country that was having fights with a terrorist cell, and their militia was fighting this terrorist cell. So where I was working, they literally collected up all this militia from this one country, brought them into where we were, put them on a compound for 2 months. They couldn't leave. And they hired my team to train them on tactics and target engagement and send them back in to fight in their own country, this terrorist cell. Now, we're on ranges with AK-47s, right? I'm a retired sergeant major, and I'm doing demos with live fire, running. I'm up, he sees me, I'm down, rolling. I mean, not to the basic level, but I'm doing things like that with tactics at that age. And it was fun. You know, I loved it. But we're on this range, and usually when you're a marksmanship instructor, which I did a lot of that in my 10 years or close to 10 years after retirement, and in my career, I'm a firearms instructor too. You know, I own firearms. You know, and that's a very important thing, that you pay attention to safety in the considerations. So on this range, normally I would have 3 targets as an instructor where I can say, I can evaluate and make corrections and take care of these 3. But this militia group, when they sat down on a target, it was 1 instructor per 1 shooter. And you were given a 9mm locked and loaded on your hip, and you had to take a knee literally over their back. They were in a prone position with the AK-47 while we're shooting, because we had threats of possibilities where one of them could be a buried cell, stand up and try to shoot the instructors. So we're literally over them with a pistol loaded, correcting them on their AK-47 target engagement, right? Tell me that doesn't make your blood pressure go up. And you're very focused on just your one shooter. And I'll never forget this one guy speaking Arabic and a little, almost like a Moroccan French kind of, fluidity. He was really good on the AK-47. And I said, hey, you've done this before? And the interpreter translated. And I spoke some Arabic, so he was able to understand. He turned and looked at me and he goes, I kill many bad guys. And he said it in English. I was like, wow, this is something you don't see every day, right? That was a very unique, experience. COVID hits, 2020. And I'm working for a foreign employer, civilian contractor, Middle East. And they closed down a bunch of departments based on what was taking place with COVID, because they were losing personnel. They couldn't get the training going on. So at the beginning of 2021, I was let go. I decided to travel more and seize the opportunity, right? So I lived in some other countries and did some other things in different countries. That was just a great, great opportunity. It really ties back into what I said about being active, even though I'm ending my time on active duty. And after about 2 years of being literally a nomad and doing all these hikes and living in other countries and having a blast, I saved well, I invested well, I have a lot of obligations financially with divorce and you name it. But my father taught me some valuable lessons about saving and investing. I never was a drinker. I didn't start drinking alcohol until 2019. Ever in my life, I had one bad situation when I was 39, where I tried it to go to sleep when I was going through some problems. Didn't work well, and I'd never drank before that. So I was, never arrested. I didn't rebel against a lot of things growing up. Pretty much straight and narrow. I didn't like some of the upbringing philosophies that I was being shown in southeastern Louisiana at the time. I wanted to find my own path. That's why I joined the Marine Corps. But going back to this period now, I wasn't ready to go back to work. So in 2022, I said, I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail. So I hiked the Appalachian Trail 6 months. And it was not the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the most rewarding that I've ever done. A 20-year-old Jean-Paul Courville would not have accomplished it. Physically, I might have looked like it, but mentally I would have collapsed, because there's something about adversity and misery that can change anyone. I have seen the toughest Marines that can run the O course today and compete with me or beat me. But if you're out in the field for 5 to 15 days and your hips are bruised from your canteens rubbing you raw, you're chafed between your thighs, you haven't showered, you haven't eaten well, you haven't slept well, you slept on the ground, they don't operate the same way running the obstacle course then. I've kind of trained myself to reconfigure my body's threshold to pain in certain ways. And I have to relearn it a lot. Because when you're used to creature comforts and you're domesticated at some point, like look at the way I'm dressed now, Now, I know that if I go out and do something like the Appalachian Trail again, completely shift my mindset. And I can do it. I've proven it many times. But it was the most rewarding thing I've ever accomplished. When I came back from that, my mother passed. And I then took a job doing something that is not my background. I got hired to work for the city of Atlanta, Georgia, as a director of procurement. And, leadership and management and all those types of things. I did it for 2 years. I learned a lot. I had some unfortunate injuries during that time with shoulder repair again, a hamstring ripped off the bone, and a wheelchair recover. And it would be easy to just give up. But the mindset I told you earlier with how I operate, I've always said, do I want to die with memories or dreams? So many people have dreams when they go to their grave and they never executed anything to make a memory. You got to make memories. Dreams are just something that die on the vine. So that was kind of my mindset, with this. And as I was recovering, working for the city of Atlanta, my father had a horrible accident where he was missing for 8 hours. He had fallen, hit his head, and was unconscious. He was a John Doe, admitted to a hospital. It took us quite some time to find him. I'm still recovering from surgery. Come back to Louisiana. We find out he's got glioblastoma brain cancer, which is a very severe terminal cancer. The best decision I've ever made in my life was I resigned my job and moved back to Louisiana to care for my father. And for 6 months, I was able to take him to appointments, eat lunch with him, get his lunch, hang out with him. He slept a lot. We talk a lot. And his tumors grew back because he'd had 2 removed from surgery. And once they told him his tumors grew back, he lasted 9 days. And the decline, which I'm sure anybody listening and watching this would, a lot of people had that experience, was the most devastating thing I've ever witnessed in my life, to watch a hero of mine literally each day fade and lose something. He was never in pain. But my father was a tough man. He grew up in the Atchafalaya Basin of Louisiana, didn't speak English until 3rd grade. He grew up speaking Cajun French, lived in the swamps. Tough guy. Construction superintendent, project manager. Loved him. He was the only person in my family that I could actually talk to about things that I didn't agree with, and he would listen, and he would tell me he was disappointed that I thought some ways, but he loved me, never turns his back on me. And a lot of people have regrets when their family, their parents died, that they didn't say the things that they wish they could have said to their parents. I don't have that. I said everything that I needed to and wanted to say, especially to my father, to my mother as well. But my father was a different story because I came back and lived with him for those 6 months. And we didn't know how much time we had with him. Very powerful. So once we laid him to rest, I knew I needed to heal. I was going through a lot. It was a rough time with him dying. I had just gotten out of a very toxic, ugly relationship that I shouldn't have been in. And I was recovering from surgeries. And based on the adventure concept, I went and I hiked the Camino de Santiago in Spain last year. It's a 500-mile pilgrimage hike. I did the Camino Frances. And I had learned about it from a movie and some documentaries. And it doesn't get a lot of airplay in the United States, but in Europe, it's a very, very prestigious thing to do. It's a religious pilgrimage, but it doesn't have to be for you. It wasn't for me. But what I did is I told myself I was going to use that opportunity to forgive myself for how I've treated certain people in my life. I have a protective instinct, not a killer instinct. And there have been a lot of people that I've been great to, inspired, I've been a mentor for, but there's a small handful of people that I did not treat very well. And usually it's because I was retaliating on how I felt they disrespected me, is usually what it boiled down to. And I felt bad about that. So, just trying to have an epiphany and then healing with my father's passing and understanding that I had done everything I could to be with my father. And so I did that hike, and I highly recommend it. I lived in England for a while, And one of the things that England does with people with post-traumatic stress is they recommend a prescription of hiking. Not pills first, and I don't mean a nature walk, they recommend hiking. And then in Spain, when they have a delinquent, kind of like what we had in the US where in Vietnam, hey, you either going in the Marine Corps or you're going to war. Or I'm sorry, you're going to the Marine Corps or you're going to prison. Which one do you want? In Spain, they had a time where they had a delinquent. They said, you're going to hike the Camino de Santiago with a mentor or you're going to prison. And that was the option they gave. And it was another, I wouldn't say life-changing experience. It was just another experience to add into the check of memories, man, that really changed my philosophy on how I do things. So during the 6 months that I was with my father, you know, you can only work out so much a day. You can only watch so much Netflix. I knew I needed to have a project since I, resigned my job and I was doing yard work, et cetera. I said, you know what? I've always wanted to write a book and I kept putting it off. I love storytelling. I've written a lot of articles and blogs, and I think I had scratched that itch, so to speak. So I kind of had given up on the idea of a book, and I didn't want to write a just military book. And I remember when I retired at 41 years of age, I thought I had stories to share, leadership lessons and combat, but I didn't want to just be in that oversaturated kind of storytelling. I love a lot of those stories, but I just didn't feel like it would be something I wanted to offer. So I put it on the shelf. And when I was with my father, I decided to write a book. And I knew what the story would be. The spine of my story was the 6 months on the Appalachian Trail. Logistically, physically, and mentally, you're alone. I hiked alone. I camped alone. You meet a lot of people. There's logistics involved. And you reflect on your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So as I wrote this book, it's called Forward On, Warrior to Wanderer. I'm very proud of this title because I've always thought I needed to move forward in life. Always move forward. I don't want to live in the past. I like to reflect on the past, like these stories today. But I want to move forward. And being in a warrior culture, 22 years Marine Corps, another almost decade with a contracting military duty, I knew I had a warrior mindset, but wandering, because we hear all the time that those who wander are not always lost. And wandering was always something that brought happiness for me to rebuild. And so you'll see a faded compass, and this is the Appalachian Trail logo, walking into the unknown and the uncertainty, which is something that I really reflected on. And it was very powerful for me to capture this in writing because this book has warts. It's got stories and decisions I made that were not very good in life. But it's not about just having accountability on things that I have done. It's about what they turned into. How did I get past? How did I move forward? How did I become successful? I wanted to thrive, not survive. And that is the census of Forward On. And there's life lessons and leadership lessons that specifically I write in one chapter. So if you are a business owner, a CEO, or a coach of a football team, and you don't want to read this book, but you're given this book and told to read chapter 21, Leadership and Life Lessons, I guarantee you it will be applicable to your employees or your athletes. And that was a strategic way I wanted to write this because it does tie in to the entire story. And look, let's face it, if you are fed up with reading stories about people who use religious punchlines and make fun of religion, or openly brag about one-night stands and casual sex, or laugh at the generalized stereotypical jokes, then you don't want to buy this book because there's loads of it in there. Forward On, available now.
Awesome. Where can people find it?
Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I've even done the audiobook. It'll be out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, very important. There is a difference between motivation and inspiration. And motivation is like a cup of coffee. You get a shot of coffee and caffeine, it's like a sugar rush. But eventually that crashes and you need to be remotivated. But if you find something or someone that inspires you, that can last a lifetime, because inspiration, once it's connected, you don't need whatever that was to be around you all the time. I'm 54 years old, and I had a 26-year-old mentor of mine when I was 23. And I have never spoken to him again since he was 27. Haven't found him. Robert Ganton. And to this day, because he inspired me so well, I will think to myself, what would Robert Ganton think of what Jean-Paul Courville is doing today, what I accomplished? That's the power of inspiration. When I talk about traveling and adventure, I meet so many people that say they coulda, woulda, shoulda. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I get all that. I was in that same boat too, on many occasions. But book the trip. Don't wait. Time is a currency. And the older I've gotten, and I will not say I'm old. I'm not. I'm older. But I hear too many people in their 30s that say they're getting old. In their 40s, they're getting old. If you say that enough, you're going to feel that and you're going to believe that. Book the trip. Take the family. Do it on your own. Don't be afraid to solo travel. If you really want to know the essence of who you are, spend time alone. And you hear people all the time say, I want to do something on my own. I want to relearn who I am. But they jump into community right away, which is fine, or they jump into another relationship right away. They always need that around them. Maybe it gives them purpose. Spend time alone. Don't be afraid to take a travel trip alone. Don't be afraid to go to a restaurant and eat alone by yourself. Take a notepad, take your book, take your phone, and plan your next trip. Don't be afraid to do it. It's worth the adventure.
Awesome, Jean-Paul. It's been a pleasure to sit with you, brother.
Me too.